Hey there and welcome back. If you are settling in now, letting your head sink into the pillow and the cares of the day begin to loosen and slip away, then you have come to just the right place. And there is nothing more you need do tonight than lie still and let yourself be carried somewhere else entirely. For tonight, we are going to a party. Not a party of our own time, with its noise and its glare, but a grand ball in a vanished world, in a part of London that was, on the small hours we are going to, almost brand new, the freshest and whitest and most fashionable address in the whole of the city, where the very mortar was scarcely dry on the grand new townhouses, and the richest people in the kingdom were moving in one after another to take their places in a district built, quite deliberately, for the having of exactly the kind of evening we are about to attend. We are going back some 180 years, to a spring night in the early 1840s, to a tall white house on one of the bold new squares of Belgravia, where the lamps are being lit and the carriages are beginning to gather, and a household of more than a score of servants has been working since before dawn toward this one affair, because tonight the house gives a dinner, and after the dinner a ball, and everyone who matters in the glittering world of the London season has been asked and is coming. By the time the last carriage rolls away into the small hours and the last candle gutters out, you will have seen the whole of it, from the kitchens far below where the cook has been in a controlled fury since morning, to the ballroom blazing at the top of the house where the dancing will go on until the windows pale toward dawn. There is a moment, late in the night, that I particularly want to bring you to, when something quiet and human happens in the midst of all the splendour. But that is hours away yet, and the first carriages are only just arriving, and there is no hurry at all. Let us take the evening slowly. Before the guests begin to arrive, let me say a quiet word about why I make these long occasions, and about the strange and lovely fact of your being here at all, wherever in the world you happen to be lying as you listen. These journeys into the past are put together slowly, read into with care, and made for one purpose only, which is to give you somewhere peaceful and beautiful to rest your mind at the end of your own day, however that day has treated you. If you find that they carry you off gently towards sleep, you would be most welcome to subscribe, so that the next of them finds its way to you of its own accord, the way an invitation arrives without your having to go looking for it. And if you feel inclined, I would dearly love to know which part of the world you are listening from tonight, and what hour it has reached where you are, for I read everything that comes back to me, and there is a deep and settling pleasure in the thought of so many of us, scattered across so many cities and countries and times of night, all drawing in together toward the same warm imagined house, all of us guests, in a way, at the same long-vanished evening. But none of that need trouble you now. It will all keep until the morning, for now there is only the gathering dusk, and the white mansion on the square, and the lamps coming on one by one along the street. So picture this. It is a little after 7 o'clock on a party in May, in the early 1840s, and the long blue dusk of a London spring is settling over the rooftops of the newest and grandest quarter of the city. We are standing at the edge of a great square, but not a square like the old squares of the town, the weathered brick squares of an earlier age. This square is new, startlingly new, its houses rising tall and white and gleaming on every side, faced not in brick but in pale stucco, smooth and painted the colour of cream, so that the whole square seems to glow faintly in the failing light. A great hollow rectangle of palaces. The residences are vast, far larger than the houses of the older quarters, 5 and 6 stories of them rising above the railings, their porticos carried on white columns, their tall windows ranged in perfect order across the cream fronts, their ironwork black and crisp and new. In the railed garden at the centre of the square the young trees, only lately planted, stand still in the blue dusk, and the gravel walks are empty now. A lamplighter is going his round, and behind him the new gas lamps that are one of the wonders of this modern district, come alive one after another with their steady greenish-white glow, far brighter and far steadier than the old oil lamps and the guttering links of the past. And there, on one side of the grand square, one house among the row of palaces is lit from top to bottom, every window glowing gold, a portico lamp burning over its door, a strip of carpet run down its steps to the very edge of the road, and a knot of idlers already gathering on the pavement opposite to watch the carriages come. That is the townhouse. Come with me. The first of the guests are almost here, and not one of them will ever know that we walked in among them. Before the carriages arrive, let me hold us out here on the square a moment longer, because the square itself is the beginning of the story, and to understand the evening we are about to attend you must first understand this strange new quarter of the city, which on the night we are visiting is among the most remarkable things in all of London. For this district did not grow, as the old parts of the city grew, slowly, over centuries, a street here and a court there. It was made, deliberately, all at once within living memory, conjured up out of nothing in the space of a couple of decades by a single great act of speculation and ambition, and it stands tonight gleaming and new where a few years before there had been only damp open fields and market gardens and a scatter of poor cottages on low marshy ground beside the river. The land belonged, as so much of the best of London belonged, to one immensely wealthy noble family, and it was a builder of genius and daring who took it in hand, a man who saw that the rich of London, grown richer than ever in this age of empire and industry and trade, wanted grander houses than the old town could give them, and who set about, on these unpromising fields, to build them a whole new district fit for the wealthiest people in the world. He drained the marshy ground and raised it with the very earth dug out to make the docks downriver, and then, street by street and square by square, he raised upon it the great cream-coloured terraces and the vast garden squares that we see around us now, building not piecemeal but whole, to a single grand design, so that the streets should run wide and straight, the squares should be large and green, and the townhouses should rise in long, unbroken palace fronts of gleaming stucco, each house a part of one great composition, the quarter a single magnificent statement of wealth and order and confidence. It was the boldest and the most successful speculation of its age, and it worked beyond all expectation, for the rich came flooding in to take the new houses almost faster than they could be built, and within a few short years the fields had become the most fashionable address in the kingdom. And consider who came to live here, for it tells you everything about the world we are entering tonight. To the old quarters of the town clung the old aristocracy, the families whose titles and lands went back centuries comfortable in their weathered brick places among streets their grandfathers had known. But this new white district drew a newer and a broader and a more interesting kind of wealth. Here came the very greatest of the nobility, certainly the dukes and the marquises in their enormous corner mansions. But here too, and in growing numbers, came the new men, the men whose fortunes were not centuries old but freshly made in trade and in banking and in railways and in the rich industries of the age, the rich merchants and the financiers and the men of business who had risen on the rising tide of the most prosperous nation on earth, and who now wanted and could buy a place among the great. It was a district where the old rank and the new money met and eyed each other and slowly, warily mixed, where a duchess might find herself at dinner beside a man whose father had kept a shop, where the bloodlines of the aristocracy and the bank balances of the new money were forever being weighed one against the other, and forever, by the one solvent of marriage, being joined. That is the world of the house we are going to tonight, the new white quarter of Belgravia, where wealth was newer and grander, and more mixed than anywhere in the kingdom, and where a festivity like the one we are about to attend was the very arena in which the great game of that world was played. So the square around us is not merely a place, but a kind of machine built for a purpose, and the purpose is the season, that great annual gathering of the wealthy and the titled in London through the spring and the early summer, when Parliament sat, and the town filled and the apparatus of fashionable society cranked into motion. The dinners and the balls and the routs and the receptions following one upon another night after night for months, the marriage market and the social exchange and the glittering public theatre of the ruling class, all carried on in exactly these bold new lit houses on exactly these new squares. The mansions were built for entertaining, designed around the giving of evenings like tonight's, their grand staircases made to be ascended in procession, their great salons made to be thrown open and filled with gathering, their whole architecture bent toward the display and the hospitality and the splendour of the season. And tonight, in this one lit house on the square, the machine is about to do the thing it was built for. The household is ready. The rooms are blazing. The carpet is down. And the first carriage is turning into the square. Now that we have seen who has come tonight, and from which two worlds, let us step back a moment from the bright rooms and consider how this district came to be at all. For the story of Belgravia is one of the most remarkable stories in the whole history of London, and the very ground beneath the dancing feet tonight was, within the memory of older guests in these chambers, something altogether different and far less grand. For where these gleaming white palaces now stand, there had lain not so very long before a stretch of low, damp, unwholesome ground beside the river, known by the old name of the 5 Fields, a place of market gardens and osier beds and scattered poor cottages, marshy and ill-drained, crossed by a few muddy lanes, a place that respectable people hurried through by day and avoided altogether by late hours, for it had an evil reputation, haunted by footpads, a dismal margin of the town where the city petered out into bog and field. That such a place should become, within a few decades, the most fashionable address in the kingdom was the achievement of one man above all, a builder of vision and iron nerve and tireless energy, who saw in those unpromising fields the opportunity of a lifetime. The land belonged to the great estate of a noble family, who held vast tracts of the western side of London and had grown immensely rich on the slow development of their holdings. And it was this builder who took a large lease of the 5 Fields and set about the colossal task of transforming them. The ground was too low and too wet to build upon, and so his first labour was to raise it and drain it. And here a happy chance served him, for at that very time the great docks were being dug down river, and the vast quantities of earth and clay excavated there were carried up and spread across the 5 Fields to raise them above the damp, so that the very ground of Belgravia is in a sense the spoil of the docks, the riverside marsh lifted and dried, and made fit at last to carry the weight of palaces. What such an undertaking required, beyond the vision, was an industrial operation of a kind London had seldom seen turned upon mere house-building. The builder kept his own brickfields and his own workshops and his own small army of craftsmen, the bricklayers and the carpenters and the plasterers and the men who worked the wet stucco, and he drove them forward year upon year with a relentless, almost feverish energy, terrace after terrace, the scaffolding never down, the carts of brick and timber and lime grinding through the half-made streets from first light to dusk. The old name of the place, the 5 Fields, that stretch of damp grazing and footpads and duelling ground, which had lain here within living memory, slipped from the map and out of mind together, and where the cattle had stood to their fetlocks in the mud there climbed, almost faster than a man could follow it from one year to the next, the tall, pale mansions of a quarter that had no like anywhere in Europe. The sums ventured were enormous, and for a time the entire gamble hung in the balance and might have ruined him. But the verdict, when it came, was beyond any dreaming, and the man who had wagered all he had on the belief that fashion could be summoned out onto a marsh died among the wealthiest in the land, his name fixed forever to the proudest address in the kingdom. There is something I find worth pausing on in this, in the sheer newness of it all, the fact that this district which seems tonight so settled and so grand, so much the natural home of wealth and rank, was in truth a brand new thing, raised within living memory upon a drained marsh, its grandeur not ancient at all but freshly built, its very stucco scarcely dry, and there is a kind of fitness in it that this new district, made new, should have become the home of the new money, the freshly made fortunes, the men whose wealth was as new as the houses they bought, for the district and its newest residents were alike in that, alike new, alike risen with startling speed to the summit of grandeur, alike a little uncertain perhaps beneath the gleaming confident surface of how secure their new eminence truly was. The old aristocracy in their weathered brick houses had centuries beneath them. Belgravia and many of its residents had only a few short years, and much of money, and a vast and gleaming confidence that money and newness together could buy a place among the eternal great. Whether they were right, only time would tell. But tonight, in the blazing rooms of the new white residence on the new white square, the confidence held and the newness gleamed, and the bold experiment of Belgravia stood at its triumphant height, the marsh forgotten, the palaces full, the most fashionable people in the kingdom gathered in the most modern splendour the age could build. And let us lift our eyes for a moment from the blazing rooms and the gathering company, and look out beyond the lit windows at the wider world in which this revel sits, the age of the early 1840s, for the splendour within these walls did not float free of its age, but belonged to a particular and a fascinating moment in the life of the nation, and to see the evening whole, we must see something of the world around it. It is a young reign. Upon the throne sits a young queen, come to it only a few years before as a girl of 18, and lately married to her foreign prince, and the court has a new and youthful brightness about it that is felt all through fashionable society, a sense of a new age beginning, a turning of the page from the old order to something fresher. The nation she reigns over is the richest and the most powerful on earth, the workshop of the nations, its factories and its mills pouring out goods, its ships carrying its trade to every corner of the globe, its empire spreading wider year by year, its wealth swelling to a scale never before seen in the history of mankind, and much of that swelling wealth was finding its way by 1,000 channels into the pockets of exactly the people gathered in these spaces tonight. And it is, above all, an age of headlong change, of a kind that the world had never known, for this is the very height of the railway age, the years when the iron roads were being flung across the country, in a fever of building and speculation that was remaking the whole face of the land and the whole pace of life. Within the lifetime of the older guests in these rooms, the fastest a man could travel had been the speed of a galloping horse. Now the steam engines flew across the country at speeds that left the old coaches standing, and were even then driving them from the roads, knitting the distant cities together, carrying goods and people and news at a pace that seemed to the people of the time very nearly miraculous, and making, in the doing of it, enormous new fortunes for the bold and the lucky, fortunes that flowed straight into the new houses of districts like this one. To be alive in these years was to feel the very ground of the old settled world shifting underfoot, the railways and the factories and the trade transforming everything, the old order giving way, new men rising, new wealth pouring forth, the nation hurtling forward into a future no one could quite foresee. But it would be a false and a partial picture if I showed you only the wealth and the brightness, for these same years had another and a darker face, and honesty requires that we see it, even from within the blazing rooms. For this was also a time of hard distress among the poor, years that would be remembered as hungry years, when bad harvests and high bread prices and the harsh dislocations of the new industrial age pressed cruelly upon the labouring masses, in the crowded courts of the cities and the cottages of the countryside, where want and hunger and disease were the common lot of millions. The same nation that built these gleaming palaces and gave these glittering soirees held within it a vast world of poverty so deep and so wide that it troubled the conscience of the age, and would in time drive great movements of reform. And the contrast was not far away, not hidden in some distant region, but pressed close, for within a short walk of this very square, beyond the gleaming new terraces, lay older and poorer streets, and the wide gulf between the world of the dinner and the ball and the life of the hungry poor ran, in truth, right through the heart of the city and the heart of the age. I do not raise this to spoil the splendour, but because the evening is the truer and the more interesting for being seen in its real place in the world, a small island of immense wealth in an age of dazzling progress and deep distress, both an age hurtling forward on iron rails toward a future of unimaginable change, an age in which the old order and the new were everywhere meeting and contending, in the nation at large, as in these very apartments. The guests gathering for their dinner tonight stood, though most of them gave it little thought, at one of the great hinges of history, in the early years of a reign that would come to seem the very summit of the nation's power and wealth and confidence, and the white palaces of Belgravia, new built and gleaming and full of the new money of a new age, were as fit a monument as any to that strange, splendid, troubled, hurtling moment in the life of the world. And now, having seen the age that holds it, let us return to the occasion where the company is gathered, and the hour of the dinner is come, and a stir is passing through the rooms, for the doors are opening, and the dinner is about to be announced. But before we watch the carriages arrive, let us go back in our minds to the start of this day, to the dark, cold hours before the dawn, because the splendour of the evening did not simply appear, and a party like tonight's was the visible tip of a whole day, indeed a whole several days, of labour, and to see only the blazing rooms and the glittering company is to see only half of what is truly there. So come back with me to the small hours of this morning, long before any guest had a thought of dressing, when the townhouse we are going to was dark and silent on its square, and let us watch it wake to its great task. The first to stir, as always, were the lowest and the youngest, the scullery maid and the kitchen maids and the under-house maids, up in the cold dark before 5 o'clock, down the back stairs by candlelight to the basement, to rake out and relight the kitchen range that must burn all day at full heat, to draw the water, to begin the first of the day's endless labour. And from that first raked grate the house came slowly to life, floor by floor, as the rest of the large staff rose and dressed, and came down to their work, the housemaids to the grates and the carpets and the dusting, the footmen to the boots and the knives and the lamps, the machine cranking itself up toward the day, on an ordinary morning that would have been labour enough. But this was no ordinary morning, for tonight the house gave its great dinner and its ball, and so upon the usual unending work of the household was laid the vast additional labour of the preparation, and the residence this day was not merely a home being kept, but a stage being built, a theatre being made ready for the evening's performance. Think of all that had to be done, and was being done, through this whole long day, in every corner of the tall house. In the kitchens far below, the cook and his helpers had been at work since morning on a dinner of many courses for a grand gathering, a labour of such scale and such precision that it consumed the below-stairs realm for days together, the ordering and the fetching, and the preparing and the cooking of a meal that must be sent up faultless, and in its proper order to a table of the most critical guests in the kingdom. Upstairs, the grand salons were being transformed, the furniture moved and arranged, the floors of the ballroom polished to a glass-like sheen, the hundreds of candles set in the chandeliers and the sconces and the candelabra, The flowers brought in and arranged in banks and bowers. The suite of reception rooms swept and dusted and polished and dressed until each surface gleamed. The dining table was laid with a precision close to ceremony, the great service of plate brought up from the strong room, and the silver polished, the glass set out rank upon rank, the linen smoothed, each fork and every flower set in its exact place by an anxious eye. The hired help came in to swell the regular staff, the extra waiters, the men to attend the door and the carriages. The wine was brought up from the cellar and decanted. The musicians arrived and set up in the gallery, and over all of it presided the great anxious authority of the upper servants, the butler and the housekeeper, and above them the hostess herself, on whose evening the whole reputation of the place and a good deal of its place in the world would that night depend. For a ball like this was not only a pleasure, it was a kind of test and a kind of statement, and the household knew it. The hostess was, in effect, mounting a grand public performance before the most judging audience in the world, and everything about the evening, the splendour of the rooms, the excellence of the dinner, the smoothness of the service, the brilliance of the company she could command, would be noted, weighed, remembered, and talked of all over fashionable London in the days to come. A triumphant festivity raised the standing of the house and all who belonged to it. A failure, a poor dinner, a thin company, a service that faltered would be a small disaster, a thing whispered of and long remembered. And so the household this day laboured under a particular pressure, a sense of the stakes of the evening, from the hostess in her anxiety down to the scullery maid scouring her pots, all of them bent toward the one end of making the occasion perfect, all of them aware, in their different ways, that tonight the house must shine. The day wore on. The light began to fade. The last preparations were made, the last candles lit, the carpet run down the steps, the servants sent to dress in their best. And as the blue dusk came down over the square, the grand residence, made ready at last, stood blazing and waiting, like a stage with the curtain about to rise, for the first of the carriages to arrive. Let us go back now, in our minds, to a moment we passed over in our hurry to see the carriages arrive, a still moment that comes in every great evening, and that those who gave such revels knew well, the strange still hush of the house in the last minutes before the first guest came, when all the labour of preparation was done, and the house stood ready and waiting, and for a few breaths perfectly still. For there is always such a moment in the giving of a grand evening, a pause between the labour and the company, when the salons are finished and lit and dressed, the candles burning, the flowers arranged, the table laid, the servants in their places, everything ready, and the first carriage not yet come, and the grand residence holds its breath. Picture it, that instant, an hour or so before we first arrived. The rooms stand blazing and empty, the candles lit and burning steady, the chandeliers ablaze, the flowers fresh and fragrant, the long table laid and gleaming and untouched, the polished ballroom floor unmarked, the splendid stage set and lit and perfect, and, for this little while, entirely empty, waiting. The servants stand ready in their places, dressed in their best, the footman by the door, the butler making his last survey of the rooms, the household poised and waiting for the occasion to begin. And the family too, dressed and ready, wait, the hostess making her last anxious tour of the spaces, checking, adjusting, a flower moved, a candle straightened, the host perhaps standing by the fire with a last quiet moment before the company came, the house, family and servants alike, suspended in the still expectant hush before the storm of the evening broke. There is a particular quality to that moment that those who have ever waited in a room made ready for guests will know, the stillness of the perfect empty room, the sense of a held breath, the strange beauty of the splendour complete and unwitnessed. the chambers at their most perfect, precisely because no one has yet entered them to disturb the perfection. The hostess walking her last tour through the blazing empty rooms, alone for a breath in the splendour she has made, might feel it most of all, the mingled pride and anxiety and strange loneliness of the hour. The grand festivity made and ready and not yet begun, the thing poised on the edge of becoming. Success or failure not yet known, the rooms perfect and empty and waiting, the held breath of the townhouse before the throng came to fill it. It was a beat of stillness in the very heart of the performance, the quiet eye before the storm of the evening, and it held its own beauty, the beauty of the perfect ready empty house, blazing and silent and waiting in the dusk. And then, into that silence, the first sound, the rumble of the first carriage turning into the square, and the spell breaks, the held breath released, the household quickening to its work, the hostess taking her place, the long-prepared gathering at last beginning. But the still moment was real, and worth our remembering, for it reminds us that even the greatest and most public of evenings had its quiet heart, its pause, its breath of stillness before the splendour broke, and that the people who gave such entertainments knew that pause, the strange, beautiful, expectant hush of the ready house, as well as they knew the blaze and the music and the crowd. We have seen the evening at its loud and blazing height. It is worth knowing, too, that it began, as all such gatherings began, in stillness, in the quiet, perfect, empty waiting chambers, in the held breath of the mansion before the first carriage came. And to that same silence, in the end, after the long, loud, splendid night, the house would return, when the last carriage had gone, and the company scattered, and the rooms fallen still again, the grand evening sinking back at last into the silence from which it rose. And now they come. The first carriage turns into the square and rolls toward the lit house, and behind it another and another, until the road before the door is a slow procession of them, the private carriages of the wealthy, drawn by matched and gleaming horses, their lamps lit, their panels polished to a mirror shine and blazoned with the painted arms of the families they carried, the coachmen on their high boxes in cockaded hats, and the footmen standing up behind in their powder and livery. One by one they draw up at the strip of carpet laid down to the road's edge, and the moment a carriage stops the household's men are at its door, letting down the step, opening the door, and out steps the company, the guests, the rich and the fashionable of London in their evening splendour, handed down across the carpet and up the lit steps and in at the open door, while behind them the carriage moves off to wait, and the next rolls up in its place, and so the slow, gorgeous business of the arrival goes on. It is a spectacle, the arrival, and it was meant to be a public spectacle that half the purpose of the party was to make. For the idlers have gathered on the pavement opposite, as they always gathered. The poorer folk of the town come to watch the rich go in, to see the carriages and the jewels and the gowns, to catch a glimpse of a famous face, and the arrival was performed, in part, for them a free show of wealth and beauty, played out on the lit steps for whoever cared to watch. The ladies come first to the eye, in their wide evening gowns of silk and satin, the skirts spreading vast over their hoops and petticoats, the bodices cut low off the shoulder, the figure shaped to the fashion of the moment, and upon them the jewels, the diamonds and the pearls at the throat and the ears, and in the dressed and ringleted hair, catching the lamplight as they crossed the carpet, a flash of cold fire in the blue dusk. The gentlemen attend them, in the severe new evening dress of the age, the dark coat and the dark trousers and the white waistcoat and the white cravat, the plain black and white uniform that the men of fashion had adopted and that set off, by its very severity, the colour and the glitter of the women on their arms. And the names that the household's man at the door takes from each arriving guest and passes up ahead of them, the names that will be announced at the door of the drawing-room above. For everyone who is anyone in fashionable society is coming tonight, or the hostess hopes they are, and the company assembling on the steps is a roll call of the wealth and the rank and the consequence of the age, the titled and the rich and the celebrated, the leading political men and the famous hostesses and the beauties of the season and the heirs to the famous fortunes, all of them gathering at this one lit door on this one spring night. To be asked to such an evening was itself a mark of standing, a sign that one belonged to the inner circle of the fashionable world, and the guests crossing the carpet tonight were, by the very fact of their being asked, certified members of the small glittering society that ruled and adorned the age. The hostess had chosen them with care weeks before, the list pondered and balanced and fought over, for the gathering was the entertainment, and to gather the right people, the brilliant and the powerful and the sought after, was the hostess's chief art and her deep anxiety. And tonight, as carriage after carriage rolls up and the right names mount the steps one after another, it seems that her art has not failed her, and that the evening will be, as she has prayed it would be, a triumph. So let us go up the steps among them, unseen in the press of silk and broadcloth and the flash of jewels, past the bowing servants at the door, and in, out of the blue dusk and the gathering crowd, in the blaze of light and warmth and welcome within. And let us pause, as the guests pause just inside the door, in the great lit hall, and take our first breath of the world we have entered, the scented brilliant air of a grand house on the night of its grand entertainment, full already of the murmur of voices and the rustle of silk and the distant tuning of the musicians far above, the house quickening now toward the height of its night, the company gathering, the rooms filling, the evening, at last, after the day of labour and the long weeks of preparation, beginning. Let us stand in the hall a moment and take it in, for the hall of a grand Belgravia mansion on such a night was a thing designed to impress at the very threshold, the first statement of the splendour to come. It is a large space, floored in marble, perhaps in a chequer of black and white, or in pale stone, cool and gleaming underfoot, and it rises tall and bright, lit now by lamps and candles, whose light is thrown back from great mirrors set into the walls, so that the brilliance is doubled and redoubled. The walls are of pale plaster, divided by columns and pilasters in the classical manner that the age so loved, and they may be hung with pictures, or with a great looking-glass, and the air is heated, kept warm against the cool of the spring night, and scented with the flowers banked about the hall and on the stairs, and with the wax of the many candles, and with the faint costly perfumes of the arriving guests. After the blue dusk and the cool air of the square, to step into this warm, bright-scented hall was to step into another element entirely, and the guests felt it, the lift of the spirits that a beautiful warm-lit salon gives at the start of a revel of pleasure. No. But the hall is only the threshold, and the eye is drawn at once to the thing that dominates it, and that is the true glory of the house, the grand staircase rising at the back of the hall and sweeping up, broad and grand, toward the reception rooms above. For in a place built for entertaining, the staircase was the central piece of theatre, the principal processional way by which the guests ascended from the hall to the drawing-rooms, and it was made magnificent for the purpose, wide and shallow-stepped and easy to climb, its balustrade of iron or of stone or of gleaming mahogany, its walls rising tall and lit, the whole sweep of it carrying the eye and the foot upward toward the light and the company above. To ascend such a staircase, in one's evening splendour, into the lit rooms where the company waited, was itself a small performance, an entrance, and the staircase was built to make the most of it, to show the ascending guest to advantage, to turn the simple act of going upstairs into a kind of stately progress. And tonight the broad staircase is alive with it, the guests mounting in a slow bright stream, the ladies' wide skirts spreading on the shallow steps, the jewels catching the light, the talk and the laughter rising with them, the brilliant company flowing up the grand stair toward the apartments above. And at the head of the stairs, at the door of the drawing room, stands the small ceremony that received each guest into the heart of the affair, the announcing. Here a servant, the butler or a footman, takes the name of each arriving guest, passed up from the door below, and announces it loud and clear into the room beyond, so that each guest enters not anonymously but heralded, their name ringing out before them into the party, and there, just within the door, stands the hostess herself, and perhaps the host beside her, to receive each guest as they are announced. The smile, the word of welcome, the touch of the hand, the small personal greeting that drew each arrival into the warmth of the gathering. It was a thing of real art, this receiving, the hostess standing at her post for the better part of an hour as the company arrived, greeting each by name, finding for each the right word, the warmer word for the honoured guest, and the gracious word for the lesser, never flagging, never faltering, holding the whole growing brilliant company in the warmth of her welcome. And it was one of the great skills of the hostess's trade, on which the success of the evening in no small part depended. So the rooms above fill, guest by announced guest, the company gathering and growing and beginning to settle into the slow bright business of a splendid occasion, the talk rising, the groups forming and shifting, the splendid machine of the gathering coming to life. And we may move freely among them now, unseen, up the grand stair and into the lit apartments, through the press of the assembly, the silk and the jewels and the broadcloth, the famous faces and the famous names, the whole glittering world of the season, assembled under one roof on one spring dark. There is much to see, and a long evening before us, the dinner still to come, and the ball after it, the long arc of the night still ahead. But for now, let us simply stand in the lit drawing-room among the assembling company, and feel the particular brilliant warmth of a large house at the start of its occasion, and let the splendour of it begin to work upon us, as it worked upon each guest who climbed that stair into the light. Let us look, while the company gathers, at the rooms themselves, for the reception rooms of a Belgravia house in the early 1840s were a particular thing, and their character tells us much about the age that made them. The grand residences of the older quarters, the houses of the previous century, had been done in the light, cool, restrained classical taste of their time, the pale colours and the delicate plasterwork and the slender refinement of the late Georgian manner. But the world had moved on, and the taste of this new age was a richer, heavier, more crowded, more opulent thing, and the chambers we move through tonight show it on every surface. The colours are deep and warm now, crimsons and golds and rich greens, the walls hung with figured silk or with heavy flock papers in strong patterns, the curtains vast and elaborate, swagged and fringed and tasselled, falling in great rich folds at the tall windows. The light is warm and golden, thrown from gas and candle, and where the older age had prized empty space and clear proportion, this age loved fullness, abundance, the room crowded with fine things, the surfaces laden, the eye met everywhere with richness and ornament. The furniture stands heavy and comfortable and abundant, the chairs and sofas deep stuffed and buttoned and upholstered in rich stuffs, drawn into groupings about the rooms for the company to gather and sit and talk, the little tables crowded with the ornaments and curiosities and treasures that this age so loved to accumulate and display, the porcelain and the silver, the framed miniatures, the objects brought back from travels, the dense clutter of a wealthy Victorian interior. Mirrors in great gilded frames hang over the marble chimney pieces, and between the windows throwing back the light and the company, and seeming to open the crowded spaces into further rooms beyond. Pictures hang close ranked upon the walls, the portraits and the landscapes and the scenes, framed heavily in gilt. Flowers are everywhere tonight, banked in the fireplaces not in use, massed on the tables, the hothouses of the wealthy having yielded up their blooms for the evening, so that the heated air is heavy with their scent. And over it all hangs the light, the mellow golden brilliant light of the chandeliers, the cut glass dripping from the painted ceilings, each candle and every gas jet doubled in the lustres, so that the room seems to swim in a warm bright haze of light. And the salons run one into another. The principal floor of such a house was given over to a suite of reception rooms designed to be thrown open together on a night like this, the folding doors between them drawn back so that the drawing room opened into the music room and the music salon into the further room beyond, the floor becoming one great connected space through which the press could move and flow and circulate, from the chamber where the hostess received to the spaces where the company gathered and talked. The eye carried through the open doors from one lit and crowded and splendid chamber to the next, the suite ablaze and alive with company. It was a kind of magnificence quite deliberate, the throwing open of the whole grand floor, the long vista of lit chambers one beyond another, the sense of unbounded space and light and richness, all of it calculated to impress, to overwhelm a little, to make the guest feel that they had entered somewhere truly splendid, somewhere that spoke in each rich surface and every blazing light of wealth without stint and taste without question. There is something I want you to feel about these spaces beyond their mere richness, and it is the warmth of them, the human warmth, as well as the warmth of the fires and the lights. For all their grandeur, these were rooms made for company, for the gathering of people, for talk and pleasure, and the meeting of friends, and on a night like tonight they were full of exactly that, the warm press of company, the rise and fall of voices, the laughter, the greetings, the whole human warmth of a large gathering of people met for an evening's pleasure. The splendour was the setting, but the assembly was the thing, and the chambers tonight are alive with it. The brilliant, crowded warmth of the season at its height, the most fashionable people in the world gathered in the most splendid rooms in the world for one of the gatherings of the year. Let us move among them, then, through the lit and crowded suite, and listen to the talk, and watch the company in the hour before the dinner is announced, when the assembly is at its first bright height and the long glorious evening still lies ahead. We have seen the ladies in their splendour, sweeping up the staircase in their wide bright gowns, the jewels in their hair, but the splendour did not simply happen, and behind every shining figure at the ball lay hours of labour and art and preparation, and it is worth our seeing, for the dressing of a great lady for a grand entertainment was an undertaking in itself. Long before the carriages began to gather, in the bedchambers of the places all across the district, the ladies had been at the business of their toilette, attended by their maids, making themselves ready, and the transformation from the daytime woman to the shining creature of the ball was a labour of hours. Consider the gown itself, the wide evening gown of the 1840s, a thing of silk or satin or gauze, the skirt vast and full, spread over its layers of petticoats, the bodice cut low off the shoulders and drawn tight to the waist, the figure shaped and structured by the corset laced beneath it, the figure moulded to the fashionable line, the sleeves small, the neckline wide, the whole gown a confection of cut and drape and trimming that the dressmaker had laboured over, and that the maid must now arrange upon her mistress, the lacing of the corset, the settling of the petticoats, the lifting and hooking and pinning of the gown, the structure built up upon the lady's body layer by layer until the shining figure was complete. It could not be done alone. A lady of fashion could no more dress herself for a ball than fly, and the maid's skilled hands were essential to it, the lacing and the pinning and the arranging that turned the woman into the vision. And then the hair, dressed and arranged in the fashion of the moment, parted in the centre and drawn down smooth over the ears and gathered behind, or built up with ringlets and braids and ornaments. The whole elaborate structure pinned and set and dressed by the maid over a patient hour, and into it the ornaments, the flowers or the feathers or the jewels, the whole crowned and finished head, a work of art in itself. And then the jewels brought from the case, the diamonds and the pearls, clasped at the throat, fastened in the ears, set in the hair, the cold fire of them against the warm skin, the family jewels that were a measure of the family's wealth and that came out for exactly such evenings, the lady's maid clasping them on, the mirror consulted, the effect studied and adjusted, and the gloves, the long white gloves drawn up the arms, and the fan, and the small reticule, and all the small finishing apparatus of the lady ready for the ball, until at last, after the hours of labour, the shining figure was complete, and the lady rose from before her glass transformed, ready to descend, to take her carriage, to make her entrance into the blazing rooms. There is something worth feeling in all this, in the labour and the art behind the splendour, and above all in the part the maid played in it. For the lady's maid, in the hours before a grand festivity, was the artist and the maker of her mistress's splendour, and a good deal of the lady's success at the ball, her looking her best, her gown sitting right, her hair holding, rested in the maid's skilled and patient hands. The two of them, the lady and the maid, passed those long hours of preparation in a particular intimacy, the maid dressing and arranging and beautifying, the lady sitting and submitting and being made ready, an intimacy of the body and of long habit that was one of the closest relationships in the lady's life, and the maid, who saw her mistress unadorned and made her splendid, who knew the secrets of the gown and the hair and the complexion, who shared the anxieties and the hopes of the evening to come, was a figure of real importance in the lady's world, close to her as few others were, and possessed, in the long ritual of the toilette, of a quiet power and a quiet knowledge that the splendid finished figure at the ball would never have suggested. The lady shone at the ball, but the maid had made the shining in the hours before, in the stillness of the bedchamber, with her skilled and patient hands, and the splendour that swept up the staircase was, in truth, the joint work of the two of them, the lady and the maid, the shining mistress and the unseen artist who had made her shine. Let us move now among the company gathering in the lit chambers, and listen and look, for the company tonight is not one single thing, but a mingling of two worlds, and the quiet tension and fascination of their mingling is, in truth, the deepest drama of the party, far deeper than any matter of soup or candlelight, and it is worth our understanding before we go any further. For the people assembling in these rooms have come, in a sense, from two different countries, though both lie within a mile or two of this square, and the whole meaning of this new district, and of evenings like this one, lies in the bringing of those two countries together under a single blazing roof. On the one side there is the old order, the established aristocracy, the families whose names are written deep in the history of the land, whose titles go back through the centuries, whose wealth lies in broad acres held since before anyone can remember, in the broad country estates that are the true seat of their consequence, the London house being only their lodging for the season. These are the people of the old quarters, of the weathered brick residences of Mayfair, and the streets about St. James's, where their grandparents lived before them, and many of them have come over tonight from those older districts, crossing the little distance from the old London to the new, a distance of half a mile and of a whole world. They carry themselves with the particular ease of people who have never in their lives had to wonder whether they belonged, the unhurried assurance of inherited rank, and they regard the new white district and the new fortunes flowing into it with a complicated mixture of disdain and curiosity, and beneath it a wary recognition that the world is changing and that they may need these new people and their money more than they would care to admit. And on the other side there is the new order, the new money, the men whose fortunes are not centuries old but freshly and enormously made, and who have come to this district precisely because it is new, because here a vast fortune can buy a grand house without the centuries of breeding that the old quarters seem to demand. Here is the banker, whose name is known in every counting house in Europe. Here the man grown vastly rich in the railways that are at this very moment being flung across the country in a fever of speculation. Here the merchant whose ships and warehouses have made him richer than half the peers in the room. Here the family whose money came from India or the West Indies, or the busy manufacturing towns of the north, the new industrial wealth of the most productive nation on earth. They have arrived, these new people, at the very summit of riches, and they want now the one thing that riches alone cannot quite buy, which is acceptance, position, a place among the great, and they have come to Belgravia to find it, and to a party like this one to take their first careful steps toward it. And so the apartments tonight are quietly charged with the great question of the age, the question of who shall belong, and on what terms the old blood and the new arrivals circling one another in the candlelight, each needing something from the other, and each a little wary of the other. The old families have the rank and the name and the centuries, which the new money cannot buy. The new men have the fortunes, vast and fresh and growing, which the old families, with their mortgaged acres and their costly establishments, increasingly need. And the long negotiation between them, conducted in 1,000 drawing rooms across 1,000 such evenings, was the very business of fashionable society in this age, the slow, careful, wary mixing of the two, the new money learning the manners and buying the houses and seeking the introductions, the old rank unbending slowly toward the fortunes it could no longer afford to despise, and the process tending always toward the one solvent that dissolved all such distinctions in the end, which was marriage, the joining of the old name to the new purse, the daughter of the large townhouse wed to the son of the new riches, the bloodline and the bank balance united, to the lasting benefit of both. That is the deep current running beneath the bright surface of the affair, and once you see it everywhere tonight, in every careful introduction, every weighing glance, every conversation between a famous name and a dowry, the old world and the new, meeting and measuring and slowly, warily joining in the lit rooms of the new white house on the new white square. Let us look more closely while the party mingles at the new people, the new money, for they are the truly fascinating presence in these rooms, and it is worth our understanding where exactly their great fortunes came from, for the sources of the new wealth tell the story of the age. The old wealth, the wealth of the aristocracy, was simple to understand, for it was land, the broad acres held for generations, the rents of the tenant farms, the timber and the minerals and the produce of the broad estates, a patrimony rooted in the soil and in inheritance, the same holdings that had sustained the leading families for centuries. But the new money was various and modern and astonishing, and it came from the new sources that the age had opened, from trade and from industry and from finance and from the empire, the new channels by which a man of energy and luck and daring might, in this age, make a fortune greater than any duke's within a single lifetime. Consider the merchant princes, the men whose riches came from trade, from the wide commerce that flowed through the ports of the most trading nation on earth, the importers and the exporters, the men whose ships and warehouses handled the goods of the world, the tea and the sugar and the cotton and the 1,000 commodities of a global commerce, and who grew on the profits of that trade, enormously rich. Consider the men of the city, the bankers and the financiers, the men who dealt in money itself, in loans and in stocks, and in the flows of capital that financed the industry and the trade and the very governments of the age, the financial princes whose names were known in every counting house of Europe, and whose fortunes rivaled those of kings. Consider the new industrialists, the men whose wealth came from the factories and the mills of the manufacturing towns, the masters of the new industry that was the wonder of the age, the makers of the textiles and the iron and the goods that the nation poured out to the world. And consider, above all, in these very years, the men of the railways, the speculators and the contractors and the promoters who were even then growing vastly rich on the railway boom, the fever of building that was flinging the iron roads across the country and making and unmaking great fortunes in the doing of it. And consider the wealth of the empire, for the empire was a maker of fortunes, the men who had gone out to India or the colonies and come back rich, the nabobs of an earlier generation and their successors, the men whose money came from the administration and the trade and the plantations of the wide empire that the nation was spreading across the world, riches made in distant places and brought home to buy a place among the moneyed in the new white townhouses of Belgravia. These were the new men, and their affluence, however vast, carried a particular character in the eyes of the old order, the character of newness, of trade, of money made rather than inherited, money that smelt, however faintly, of the counting house, and the factory and the warehouse, means that the old world, for all it increasingly needed it, could never quite regard as wholly the same as the clean inherited wealth of land. Yet, and the new men knew it, felt the faint disdain beneath the courtesy, the sense that their substance, however much of it, was not quite the right kind of riches, made rather than descended, and they laboured to overcome it, to make themselves and their families acceptable, to acquire the manners and the houses and the connections that might in time wash the taint of trade from their wealth, and make them, or their children, or their children's children, indistinguishable at last from the old families they sought to join. They bought the houses, they gave the splendid evenings, they sought the introductions and the invitations, they sent their sons to the right schools, and married their daughters as high as purse could reach, the patient labour of the new class to make itself old, to turn the freshly made fortune into the settled wealth of an established family, a labour that took generations, and that was going forward in these very apartments, on this very night, the new men taking their first careful steps up the ladder from the counting house to the peerage, the slow transformation of new money into old that was one of the deepest and most constant processes of that society, and that the white residences of Belgravia, new money in new houses reaching toward old acceptance, embodied as perfectly as any place on earth. Let us move among the company once more, and look this time at the particular people in it, for a gathering such as this one drew together a whole gallery of human types, and to walk among them is to see the fashionable society of the age in all its variety, each guest carrying their own story and their own place in the bright, crowded scene. There is the reigning beauty of the season, the young woman whose face and figure and grace have made her the toast of the year, surrounded wherever she moves by a knot of admirers, watched and envied and discussed, living her brief bright reign as the acknowledged beauty before marriage or a younger rival should end it. There is the great political personage, the statesman or the rising man of affairs, a little apart from the lighter company, talked to with deference, the centre of a graver conversation, for the dinner and the ball were not only pleasure, but also the place where the political and the social worlds met and mixed, and influence was quietly sought and given. There is the dowager, the great old lady of rank and years, seated in the best chair, holding a small court of her own, her tongue sharp, her memory long, her judgments feared, one of those formidable old women who ruled fashionable society from their chairs by the force of birth and character, and the accumulated authority of a long life at the summit of the world. There is the anxious mother, watching her daughter through the soirée with a hawk's eye, calculating every partner, weighing every attention, steering, hoping, the whole campaign of the daughter's season concentrated in the mother's watchful gaze. There is the marriageable daughter herself, in her first or second season, nervous and hopeful and watched, living the evening that her whole upbringing had prepared her for, that dancing and the attention and the hope of the match that would settle her future. There is the eligible young man, the heir to a name or a fortune, pursued by the mothers, conscious of his value in the marriage market, choosing or being chosen. There is the newly rich wife, anxious and overdressed perhaps, studying the manners of the great ladies, trying to learn the unwritten rules, conscious always of the faint condescension beneath the courtesy, labouring to make her way in a world that her husband's money had bought entrance to, but not ease within. There is her husband, the man of new fortune, easier perhaps than his wife, or less easy, the banker, or the railway man, or the merchant, taking his place among the great, watchful, ambitious, a little out of his element, and determined not to show it. There is the impoverished aristocrat, the man of ancient name and empty purse, charming and idle, and looking, perhaps, for the rich wife who would restore his fortunes, the old blood seeking the new money as openly as the new money sought the old blood. There is the clever spinster, the witty woman past her youth, who had made a place for herself by her conversation and her usefulness, welcome everywhere for her sharp tongue and her good sense. There is the diplomat, the foreign visitor, the celebrated author or artist invited to lend the soiree a touch of brilliance, the various company of the fashionable world gathered under the one roof. And the fascination of it, the deep human fascination, is that each of these was a whole person, with their hopes and their fears and their schemes and their secrets, gathered for this one evening into the bright crowded scene, playing their parts in the great social theatre, and all of them, the beauty and the dowager, the anxious mother and the hopeful daughter, the new rich wife and the impoverished lord, caught up together in the one soiree, the one bright gathering, the one turn of the social wheel. They came together for the evening, this gallery of types, and they would scatter in the morning to their separate lives, and the gathering that the night had made would dissolve and never quite reassemble. One more evening's company, one more turn of the season, one more bright crowded scene played out under the blazing lights and then gone. And we, moving unseen among them, may see them all, the human gallery of the fashionable world, gathered for this one night, the beautiful and the ambitious and the anxious and the proud, each carrying their story, each playing their part, the whole various brilliant throng of the age assembled for the gathering, before the carriages came at dawn to bear them all away. A stir passes through the rooms, a quickening, a turning of heads, for the folding doors at the end of the suite have opened and the butler has appeared, and in his grave, deep voice he announces that dinner is served, and at once the lively, loose assembly of the company begins to resolve itself into order, for the going in to dinner was no casual matter of drifting toward the table, but a ceremony of the most exact and the most jealously observed kind, governed by rules of precedence so precise and so rigid that a mistake in them could give offence that was remembered for years. For each lady must be taken in to dinner on the arm of a particular gentleman, and the pairing of them, and above all the order in which the pairs proceeded to the table, was determined by rank, by the exact and minutely graded rank of every person in the room, and the hostess had laboured over it beforehand, as over a problem in the highest mathematics. For to send a duchess in below a countess, or to pair a great personage with an unworthy partner, was a blunder that the offended party would neither forgive nor forget. Watch, then, how it is done. The host offers his arm to the lady of highest rank present, and leads the procession. The gentleman of highest standing takes in the hostess, and they come last, or nearly so, and between them the company pairs off and falls into line according to the strict order of their consequence, the highest first, descending by exact degrees to the least. And here in this small ceremony, the central theme of the evening shows itself again, sharp and clear. for the order of precedence was the rule of the old order, the world of inherited title, in which a man's place was fixed by his title and his birth, and the new money, however vast, had no place in it at all, save what its possessors' titles, if any, allowed. The duke went first because he was a duke, though his estates were mortgaged to the roof. The great banker, richer than the duke 10 times over, went far down the line, or nowhere in particular, because money, however much of it, conferred no precedence, and a man whose father had made millions in trade must yield, in the going in to dinner, to the youngest son of the meanest peer. It was the old world's way of reminding the new money, gently but unmistakably, that there were things its fortunes could not buy, and the new men felt it, the small daily slights of a system built to keep them in their place, and bore it. For now, because the prize they sought was worth the swallowing of such pills. And so the procession forms and moves, the host and his great lady at its head, the line of pairs behind, the ladies on the gentlemen's arms, the wide skirts and the dark coats, the jewels and the white cravats, moving in stately order out of the drawing-room and along toward the dining-room down the lit and flower-decked way, the brilliant company proceeding 2 by 2 to the table in the exact order of their rank, a living diagram of the old order's hierarchy, made visible in the very manner of their walking in to dinner. There is a beauty in it, a stately ceremonious beauty, the slow procession of the splendid gathering, and there is, beneath the beauty, the whole quiet drama of the age, the old order asserting itself in the very arrangement of the line, the new money taking its appointed lower place and biding its time, the ancient machinery of rank and precedence grinding on in the new white residence, as it had ground on for centuries in the old. They reach the dining-room, and the company files in and finds its places, for each guest's seat at the table too was appointed beforehand, the cards laid out, the seating planned with the same anxious care as the procession, so that each should sit in their proper relation to the rest, the honoured high near the host and hostess, the lesser ranged below, the table a further diagram of consequence, and the partners who came in together, seated together, so that each lady had her gentleman beside her for the business of the meal. They stand a moment behind their chairs as the last of the company comes in and finds its station, and then, at a sign, they are seated, the line of them settling into their seats down the great table, the silk skirts arranged, the gentlemen seating the ladies and then themselves, and the company is at last at table, ranged in its order, beneath the blazing chandeliers, before the gleaming array of the laid table, and the central event of the occasion, the dinner itself, is ready to begin. Let us stand a moment at the side of the dining-room and look upon the table, for the table of a grand Belgravia dinner was a spectacle in itself, a work of art assembled over hours, and the sight of it as the company took their places was meant to draw a breath of admiration, and did. The salon is large and richly done, the walls deep-coloured, hung perhaps with the family portraits or with dark pictures in heavy gilt frames, the curtains drawn against the night, the room blazing with the light of the chandeliers above, and the candelabra ranged down the table, so that this room, like all the spaces tonight, swims in a warm golden brilliance. And down the centre of the room runs the table, long enough to seat the crowd, covered in the finest white damask, smooth and gleaming, and upon it is set out the magnificent apparatus of a grand dinner. The first thing the eye takes in is the gleam of silver and glass and porcelain under the blazing light. The silver is everywhere, the great pieces of plate that were a chief measure of a family's wealth and consequence, the candelabra rising in branched splendour down the table, the great centrepiece, the épergne perhaps, a towering confection of silver, holding fruits and flowers and sweetmeats, the tureens and the salvers and the dishes, the forks and the spoons and the knives ranged in exact order at each place, The glass stands rank upon rank at every setting, a glass for each of the several wines that would be served through the meal, the cut crystal throwing back the candlelight in points of cold fire. The porcelain, the grand dinner service, fine and costly and matched, perhaps bearing the family's crest or monogram, is set out for the courses to come. The white napkins are folded into elaborate shapes at each place, and among and along all of it are the flowers banked down the centre of the table, massed about the épergne, the blooms of the hothouse yielding up their colour and their scent to crown the gleaming composition, so that the table is at once a banquet and a garden, a thing of silver and crystal, and flowers blazing under the golden light. For the laying of such a table was a serious art, and the household had laboured over it, the butler above all, on whom the dignity of the table chiefly rested, for the arrangement of the plate and the glass and the flowers, the exact placing of every piece, the balance and the symmetry and the splendour of the whole, was a matter of pride and of long practice, and a well-laid table was a credit to the house that a poorly laid one could never be. Every fork lay at its exact distance from its neighbour. Each glass stood in its appointed place. The centrepiece held the eye at the heart of the table. The candelabra marched in their even rank, the vast gleaming length of it composed and balanced and dressed with a care close to reverence. And it was meant, all of it, to impress, to speak before a word was said of the wealth and the taste and the consequence of the house, to make the guest, taking their place at such a table, feel the weight of the splendour they had been admitted to. And now the company is seated, the line of them down either side of the gleaming table, the ladies and the gentlemen alternating, the silk and the jewels and the white cravats, the faces lit warm and golden in the candlelight, and behind them, ranged along the walls, stand the servants, the footmen in their livery and powder, one to every 2 or 3 guests, motionless and ready, the butler overseeing all from his place near the head, and the apparatus of the dinner stands poised, the table laid, the company seated, the servants ready, the kitchen far below at the height of its long day's labour, waiting only for the signal that will set the first course in motion. There is a moment of stillness almost, the company settled and expectant, the room blazing and beautiful, the long table gleaming, and then the service begins, and the first of the many courses of the long magnificent dinner is carried in, and the central rite of the evening is under way. The dinner that now begins is conducted in a manner that was, in the early 1840s, just coming into fashion among the most modern of households, and that marked a real change from the way of the previous age. The older fashion had been to set all the dishes of a course upon the table at once, in a great symmetrical array, and let the company help themselves and one another, a manner that made a fine show of abundance but left the food to cool and the guests to struggle with the carving. The new fashion, the modern way, the way of the most up-to-date townhouses, was different and more refined. The dishes no longer heaped upon the table, but carved and portioned at the sideboard, and handed round to each guest in turn by the servants, course after separate course, so that the table itself was kept clear for its silver and flowers, and the food came to each guest hot and ready and without labour. It was a newer, more elegant, more servant-intensive way of dining, and that a house dined in this modern manner was itself a small mark of fashion, a sign that it kept abreast of the latest refinements, and a house as new and as ambitious as this one would surely have adopted it. And so the courses come, one after another, in their long and stately succession, each handed round by the footman to every guest in turn, a dinner of many courses that would occupy the crush for 2 hours and more. There is the soup to begin, 2 soups perhaps, a clear and a thick, offered to each guest to choose between. There is the fish that follows, the turbot or the salmon or the sole, with its rich sauce. There are the entrees, the made dishes, the cutlets and the fricassees and the elaborate confections of the cook's art, handed round in their succession. There is the great roast, the saddle of mutton, or the haunch of venison, or the sirloin of beef, carved at the sideboard and served. There is the game in its season, the birds brought to the table. And then, as the savoury courses give way, the sweet things, the puddings and the jellies and the creams, the elaborate moulded sweets, the ices, and at the last the dessert, the fruits and the nuts and the sweetmeats, the hothouse grapes and the pineapple, that were the costliest luxuries of the age, set out for the close of the meal. It is a procession of food on the grandest scale, course upon course, dish upon dish, the long magnificent progress of a great Victorian dinner, and through it all the footman moves ceaselessly, handing the dishes, changing the plates, a fresh plate for each course, the used plates whisked away and the clean brought, the intricate dance of the service going forward without pause. And with every course its wine, for the wines were matched to the dishes and changed as the dinner progressed, poured by the servants into the rank of glasses at each place, the sherry with the soup, the hock or the chablis with the fish, the champagne as the meal advanced, the great red wines, the claret and the burgundy, with the roast and the game, the rich sweet wines with the dessert, and the long meal floated forward on this changing tide of wine, glass after glass, so that the company grew bright and easy and voluble as the courses passed, the talk rising, the laughter coming more freely, the careful early stiffness of the gathering melting away into the genial warmth of a large company well fed and well wined and at its ease. The wine was the host's pride, as the table was the butler's, the cellar laid down and tended for exactly such evenings, the finest vintages brought up and decanted, and a man's wine like his cook was a measure of his establishment, talked of and remembered, so that to give a guest poor wine was nearly as great a failing as to give him poor food. It is much of food, and a good deal of wine by any measure, and to us it would seem a feast of almost alarming abundance, course upon rich course through 2 hours and more. But you must understand that the dinner was never only, or even chiefly, about the eating, for no one was expected to eat heavily of every dish, and a guest might take a little of this course and pass the next, that abundance being there for choice and for show as much as for consumption. The dinner was an occasion, a ceremony, a stage, and the food, for all its splendour, was the setting rather than the substance of it, the real substance being the company and the talk, and the slow social business of the affair, conducted at leisure through the succession of the courses. And so let us turn from the food to the thing the food was really for, the conversation at the table, the slow, bright social current that ran the length of the dinner, for it is there, in the talk between the courses, that the true life of the evening was lived. The conversation at a great dinner table was itself an art, and one that the people of this world had cultivated from the cradle, and to listen to it, as we may, moving unseen behind the chairs, is to hear the very voice of the age, and the very business of the affair. The rule was that each guest talked chiefly with the partner who had brought them in, the lady turning to the gentleman on her one hand for a while, and then, as the table turned, to the gentleman on her other, the table conversing in low-paired murmurs rather than in any general talk, so that the dining-room filled with the steady, pleasant hum of 100 private conversations, the rise and fall of voices, the soft laughter, the warm social music of a throng at its ease. And the talk ranged over everything and nothing, over the small affairs of fashionable society, the marriages made and rumoured, the scandals whispered, the fortunes risen and fallen, the doings at court and in Parliament, the new books and the new operas, the gossip of the season, the whole endless absorbing chronicle of who was who, and who was doing what to whom. That was the perpetual study of fashionable society. But beneath the pleasant surface ran the deeper currents we have spoken of, and a sharp ear could catch them. For at such a table the old world and the new sat side by the hostess's careful design, and the talk between them was its own quiet drama. Here a daughter of an ancient mansion made conversation with a man whose millions were newer than her gloves, weighing him perhaps as a possible match for all his want of breeding. There an old peer, his acres mortgaged, was charming to a banker, whose goodwill he might one day need. There a newly rich wife, anxious and watchful, studied the manners of the great lady beside her, and tried, not always with success, to match them. The new people were learning, at such tables, the thousand small unwritten rules of the world they sought to enter, the right words and the right tone and the right degree of ease. And the old people were taking the measure of the new, deciding, slowly, which of these fresh fortunes might be admitted, and on what terms the long negotiation of the age going forward in the murmured talk between the courses, beneath the candlelight, over the gleaming plate. And the talk was, for the ambitious, a kind of examination, for nothing betrayed the newcomer so quickly as a fault in conversation, a subject raised that ought not to be, a warmth shown where coolness was correct, an eagerness that the truly grand never displayed, a want of the particular easy idleness of tone that marked the person bred to this world. The new rich studied it desperately, this art of fashionable talk, and the cleverest of them mastered it, learned to speak of nothing with the right air of languid amusement, to drop the right names, to show neither too much knowledge nor too little, to be, in a word, at ease. For ease was everything, the unforced assurance that could not be bought, and could only, with much labour, be imitated. The old families had it without thinking, the birthright of generations. The new people reached for it, some gracefully, and some with a painful obviousness that the old order noted and quietly mocked, and the gap between the two, the gap of manner and tone and ease, was in its way as wide as the gap of blood, and far harder for money to bridge. So the dinner is not merely a meal, but a stage on which the social contest of the age is played out, course by course, conversation by conversation, the old world and the new measuring and circling, and slowly mingling beneath the bright candlelight. And the long ceremony of it, the food and the wine and the talk and the careful seating, is the very machinery by which the fashionable world conducted its endless business of inclusion and exclusion, of judging who should rise and who should not, of joining, in the end, by marriage and by friendship and by the slow erosion of resistance, the new money to the old name. And the hostess, at the head of her table, watching all of it with a practised eye, gathering the threads, smoothing the difficulties, presiding over the delicate social chemistry of her evening, was the true artist of it. For the success of such a dinner lay not in the food alone, but in the mixing, the bringing together of the right people in the right way, so that the gathering should advance, however slightly, the slow business of the world, and a hostess who could do that, who could make her table a place where the old and the new met and mingled to advantage, was a power in society, courted and admired, her invitations prized, her evenings remembered. And tonight, as the long dinner moves through its courses toward its close, her art seems to be holding the table warm and bright and easy, the difficult chemistry working, the party, so far, a success. At length the dinner draws toward its close, the dessert eaten, the last of the sweet wines poured. And there comes the moment of one of the evening's small fixed ceremonies, the withdrawing of the ladies. The hostess catches the eye of the principal lady, a glance passes down the table, and the ladies rise all together, in a great soft rustle of silk, and withdraw from the dining-room, leaving the gentlemen behind them to their wine. It is an old custom, this parting of the company, and it gives the evening a kind of breathing space, a quiet interval in the midst of the splendour, and there is something in it worth our pausing on. For after the bright press of the dinner, the space divides into two quieter worlds, and the pace of the revel, for a little while, slows and softens. The ladies go up, back to the drawing room, where the fire has been kept and the candles tended, and there among themselves, away from the gentlemen, they pass a calmer interval, the coffee brought, the talk turning to their own concerns, the easy intimate talk of women, among women, of children and households and matches, and the 1,000 private matters that the presence of the men kept at bay. It is for them a gentler passage of the evening, the public performance of the dinner set aside for a while, the company smaller and more intimate, the talk freer, and the older ladies sink gratefully into the comfortable chairs by the fire while the younger gather at the windows or about the room, and there is a softening, a relaxing, a quiet feminine ease that the long ceremony of the dinner had not allowed. And the gentlemen remain at the table, the cloth drawn, the decanters set out and passed from hand to hand, the port and the claret going round, and their talk, too, changes in the ladies' absence, growing freer and broader, turning to the matters thought unfit for mixed company, to politics and money and sport and the coarser jokes, the cigars perhaps lit, the wine going round, the whole tone of the room loosening into a masculine ease. And here, in the freedom of the men's talk over the wine, the real business of the age was often done, the political understandings reached, the financial arrangements hinted at, the matches between families first cautiously broached, for it was in these unbuttoned intervals, the men alone with their wine, that much of the serious work of that world went quietly forward beneath the cover of the idle masculine talk. The old peer and the new banker, left alone together over the port, might come, in an hour of wine and ease, to an understanding that all the careful dinners in the world could not have reached, and the withdrawing of the ladies, for all its appearance of mere custom, served this deeper purpose too, the giving of a space in which the men of the world could speak plainly among themselves. It is, this interval, a quieter beat in the occasion, a slackening of the bright tension of the dinner, and the house feels it, the two divided companies passing their easier hour, the ladies in the drawing-room above, and the gentlemen at the table below, the servants moving more slowly now in the lull between the dinner and the ball, the whole grand evening pausing, gathering itself, before the next and most brilliant of its movements. For the ball is still to come, the dancing, the height and crown of the late hours, and even now the further guests are beginning to arrive, those asked not to the dinner, but only to the ball that follows, the carriages once more gathering at the door, the salons above beginning to fill again, the musicians in the gallery taking up their instruments. The quiet interval will not last long. But for this little while the gathering rests, divided and easy, the ladies at their coffee and the gentlemen at their wine, and there is a sweetness in the pause, in the slackening of the splendour, that those who lived these evenings knew well, the brief, quiet breath, drawn in the very midst of the performance, before the company joins again and the dancing begins. Let us linger a while in the rooms below the stairs, for the people who run a Belgravia place deserve our knowing, and the household of such a house was a small and intricate society, as ordered and as graded in its own way as fashionable society above it. A house of this size and ambition kept a great staff, a score of servants and more, arranged in a hierarchy as precise and as jealously observed as any in the kingdom, each servant knowing their exact place in it, and the below-stairs world running on rules of rank and precedence that mirrored, in their own sphere, the rules of the throng above. At the head of the male staff stood the butler, a figure of weight and dignity, in charge of the wine and the silver and the dining-room and the undermen servants, the public face of the household service, on whom the smoothness and the dignity of the table and the door chiefly rested, a man of long experience and great responsibility, very nearly a power in his own domain. At the head of the female staff stood the housekeeper, addressed by all as mistress, who held the keys to the stores and the linen, governed the maids, and ruled the domestic economy of the residence with a practised and watchful authority. Between and below them ranged the rest in their order, the cook, who in a grand house might be a man and a personage of real consequence, ruling the kitchen as a kingdom, the lady's maid, who dressed the mistress, and the valet, who dressed the master, the upper servants, close to the family and privy to its secrets, the footman, chosen tall and matched and handsome, powdered and liveried, whose work was half use and half display, the housemaids who cleaned and carried, the kitchen maids and the scullery maid, lowest of all in the heat and the wet, and below the indoor staff, in the mews behind the place, the coachman and the grooms among the horses and the carriages. Each knew their place, and the place was minutely graded, the upper servants and the lower as distinct in their world as the aristocracy and the new money in the rooms above, the butler and the housekeeper and the lady's maid and the valet and the cook, forming a kind of below-stairs gentry, who even took their own meals apart in the housekeeper's space, withdrawing from the common servants' hall with a ceremony that exactly mirrored the company withdrawing above. For the world below the stairs was not a formless mass of labour, but a society with its own ranks and its own rules and its own pride and its own fierce distinctions, and a footman would no more have presumed above his station at the servants' table than a banker would have presumed above his at the dinner above. The same iron sense of degree running from the top of the house to the bottom. The whole establishment, upstairs and down, a single vast hierarchy of rank. And the people who filled these posts were, of course, people, with their own lives and hopes and griefs going on beneath the labour, and it is worth our remembering it, for they are easy to see only as the machinery of the splendour, and to forget that they were as human as the company they served. They had their own society below stairs, their friendships and their rivalries and their loves, the warmth of the servants' hall when the work was done, the romances between the footmen and the maids that the household frowned on and that flourished all the same. They had their ambitions of rising through the ranks, of becoming a butler or a housekeeper or a cook in their own right, of bettering their place and their wage. They had their hard lot too, the hours and the heavy work, and the little freedom, the lives bounded by the house and the demands of the family. The youngest and lowest worked hardest and seen least. And tonight, on the night of the grand ball, they laboured at the full stretch of their powers, the household, from the butler in his dignity to the scullery maid in her heat, all of them bent toward the one end of making the evening perfect, all of them, in their different ways and their different places, the makers of the splendour that the company above enjoyed and never saw, and never thought to thank. The quiet interval ends, as all such intervals end, and the soirée gathers itself for its most brilliant movement. The gentlemen rise at last from the table and rejoin the ladies above, and the divided party is one again, and now the further guests are arriving in earnest, the carriages once more streaming into the square and drawing up at the door, for many are asked only to the ball and not to the dinner, the ball being the larger and the more public gathering, and the rooms that held the dinner company now fill and fill again with the swelling crowd, the announced names ringing out once more at the drawing-room door, the staircase alive again, with the ascending stream of silk and jewels and broadcloth. The dinner had been the intimate heart of the evening, a chosen company at the table. The ball is the public spectacle, the doors thrown wide to the wider fashionable world, and as it gathers, the residence rises toward the full height of its splendour, and the heart of the ball is the ballroom, the grand room kept for the dancing, and let us go up to it now, for it is the most magnificent salon in the house, and tonight it is at its blazing best. In a townhouse built for entertaining on this scale, the ballroom was often set at the very top, a great long room running the width of the house or more, its ceiling high, its floor of polished wood laid for dancing, and tonight it stands ready and waiting, the floor swept and chalked and polished to a gleaming sheen, the chandeliers ablaze overhead, the walls lined with chairs and settees for those who would sit and watch, the windows curtained against the night. The brilliant room flooded with the golden light of hundreds of candles and gas jets, the lustres dripping fire, the mirrors at the ends of the chamber throwing back the light and the company, so that the great space seemed to stretch away into further blazing rooms beyond. The flowers amassed here too, banked at the ends and along the walls, the scent of them heavy in the warm air, and at one end, raised a little, is the gallery or the dais where the musicians sit, tuning now, the first stray notes of the instruments drifting out over the gathering company. It is a room made for one purpose, the ballroom, made to hold a grand crush in movement and light and music, and as it fills tonight it begins to glow with the particular brilliance of a ballroom at the start of a ball, the company gathering along the walls and in the doorways, the ladies in their wide gowns of every colour, the white shoulders and the bare arms, the jewels blazing in the dressed hair and at the throats, the gentlemen in their severe black and white moving among them, the brilliant crowd assembling in the blazing salon, the talk and the laughter rising, the air growing close and scented and charged with the particular excitement that precedes the dancing. For the ball was, for the young above all, the central event of the social year, the place where they might dance and flirt and be seen, where the young men sought out the young women, and the mothers watched from the chairs along the wall, where the delicate dance of courtship was carried on under the cover of the literal dancing, and the air of the ballroom before the music began was thick with anticipation, with the hopes and the nerves and the excitement of the young, with the bright promise of the night to come. And here too, in the ballroom as at the dinner table, the themes of the ball played on, for the ball was a marriage market as much as a pleasure, and the dancing was watched by sharp maternal eyes that read in every partnership a possible match, and the joining of the old blood and the new money, which the dinner had advanced in talk, the ball might advance in something nearer to the heart, for a young man and a young woman who danced together, who were seen to take pleasure in each other's company, who met again and again through the figures of the dance, might be the beginning of exactly the alliance that the families on both sides desired and schemed for, the famous name and the fortune drawing together, not only by the cold arithmetic of the settlement, but by the warmer pull of youth and music and the dance. The ballroom was where the young of the two orders met most freely, under the watching eyes of their elders, and many a marriage that joined an ancient house to a new fortune had its first beginning in a dance in exactly such a blazing room, on exactly such a spring night. And now the room is full, the company gathered, the musicians ready, a hush of expectation falling over the brilliant crowd, and the host and hostess take their places, and a signal passes to the gallery, and the music begins. Let us pause, in the midst of the evening, to consider a thing that set this new white district apart from the old quarters of the town, and that the company moving through the blazing apartments enjoyed without much thought, and that is the sheer modernity of the mansion, the new conveniences and comforts that made a Belgravia mansion of the 1840s one of the most advanced and comfortable dwellings in the world. For these were not old houses adapted to new ways, but new houses built from the first, with the latest improvements that the ingenuity of the age could supply, and the difference told in 100 ways through the comfort of the ball. Consider the light, first of all, for the light of this mansion was, in part, a new and a modern light. The old houses had been lit wholly by candle and by oil, by flame that had to be tended and trimmed and carried, but the new district was among the first to be lit by gas, the marvel of the age. The gas piped to the very lamps along the streets, and, in the more daring mansions, into the halls and the passages and the offices within, burning with a steady, brilliant light that needed no trimming and no carrying, that came on at the turn of a tap, a light brighter and steadier and more modern than anything the older world had known. The grandest rooms might still be lit by candle, for the soft golden candlelight was thought kinder to the complexion, and more elegant than the harder glare of gas, and the chandeliers still dripped their wax. But through much of the house the new gas burned, in the streets without and the offices within, a sign of the modernity of the place, the new light of the new age in the new district. Consider the water and the warmth. Here too the new houses were marvels of modern convenience. Where the old townhouses had relied wholly on water, carried up by hand from the basement to every floor, the newest houses were built with water piped up within them, cisterns in the roof, and pipes carrying the water to the upper floors, a convenience that transformed the labour of the household and the comfort of the family. And with the piped water came the beginnings of the modern bathroom and the water closet, the new sanitary arrangements that were just coming into the grandest mansions, and that made them cleaner and more comfortable than any dwellings before them. The houses were warmed, still, chiefly by the open coal fires in each room, but built with an eye to comfort the old houses had lacked, better proportioned, better served, designed from the first for the comfortable living of the wealthy in a comfort-loving age. And there is a fitness in all this in the modernity of the townhouse that joins again to the central theme of the evening. For this was a new district, built new, full of new money, and it was fitting that it should be modern in its very fabric, the most up-to-date houses for the most up-to-date fortunes, the gas and the piped water and the new conveniences, as fresh and as confident as the wealth that filled the spaces. The old aristocracy in their old brick houses had the weight of centuries, the dignity of age, the patina of long possession, but they had also the draughts and the discomforts and the inconveniences of old places built for an older way of living. The new money in the new white houses had no centuries behind it, but it had the latest comfort the age could buy, the bright new gas and the piped water and the well-built modern rooms. And there was a kind of statement in that too, the new world declaring, in the very fabric of its places, that it belonged to the future as the old order belonged to the past, that whatever the old families had of dignity and descent, the new men had the newest and best and most comfortable of everything that money and modern ingenuity could provide. The house tonight was a modern house, a comfortable mansion, a house of the new age, and the press enjoyed its modern comforts as they enjoyed its splendour, the bright gas and the heated rooms, and the well-served comfort of it all, the very newest way of living, in the very newest quarter of the greatest city in the world. The music begins, and the ball is launched, and the grand space comes alive with movement. The first couples take the floor, the partners arranged, the figures formed, and at the stroke of the music the dancing begins, the company moving now in the patterns of the dance, the wide skirts swaying and turning, the dark coats moving among them, the bright crowd resolving into the ordered motion of the figures. The dances of the age were many and various, the stately and the lively both, the old country dances in their long figures where the couples moved down the set, and the company danced together in a great ordered pattern, the quadrilles in their squares of 4 couples moving through their measured changes, and newer and more thrilling, the waltz, that dance of couples turning close together in each other's arms, which had scandalized an earlier generation by its intimacy and was now the height of fashion, the young especially loving it, the turning, gliding, close-held dance that let a young man hold a young woman as no other moment of their careful lives allowed. Watch the room as the dancing takes hold, for there is a great beauty in it, the movement and the colour and the light all together. The couples turn and glide and pace through the figures, the silk skirts swaying and spreading, the jewels catching the blazing light as the heads turn, the floor a shifting, brilliant pattern of colour and motion beneath the dripping fire of the chandeliers. The music pours down from the gallery, the strings and the woodwinds carrying the dance, the rhythm lifting and turning, filling the room, setting the pace of the moving company. The watchers lined the walls, the older guests in the chairs and settees, the mothers with their sharp, observing eyes, the gentlemen, not dancing, gathered in the doorways, all of them watching the bright, turning spectacle of the dance. And over it all hangs the scented, brilliant air of the ballroom at its height, the heat of the candles and the dancers, the scent of the flowers and the perfumes, the rich sensory atmosphere of a grand ball at its most splendid moment, when the dancing is well begun, and the space is full, and the music is pouring, and the night seems as if it might go on forever. For the young, this was the very summit of life, or felt so, the ball at its height, the music and the dancing and the bright crush, the chance to dance with the one they hoped to dance with, the whole charged romantic excitement of youth and music, and the turning dance. A girl in her first season, dancing in such a room, in her first grown-up gown, her card filled with the names of her partners, watched over by her anxious mother, living the night she had dreamed of and been prepared for through all her girlhood, knew an excitement and a happiness that the rest of life could rarely match. And the ballroom was full of such hopes and such happiness, the young living their bright hour, the music carrying them, the hours at its golden height. And then the older watchers lining the walls watched the young at their dancing with the complicated feelings of their age, the pleasure in the spectacle, the memory of their own such nights long past, the calculating maternal eye-reading matches in the partnerships, the whole bitter-sweet adult contemplation of youth at its dance. And the room held them all, the dancers and the watchers, the young and the old, the hopeful and the resigned, all of them gathered in the one blazing apartment on the one spring night, at the height of the occasion. And the dance went on, and the music with it hour upon hour, the dances following one another, the couples forming and dissolving and forming anew, the company growing bright and easy and tireless, the night deepening outside the curtained windows while within the ballroom blazed on, the candles burning down and being replaced, the musicians playing on, the dancing carrying the company forward into the small hours of the morning. For a great ball did not end early, but ran on far into the night, the dancing continuing long after a more sober world had gone to its bed, the company unwilling to let the bright hours go, dancing on toward the dawn, and the ballroom at 2 and 3 in the morning, the candles low, the company thinned a little, but dancing still, the music playing on, had a particular late beauty, a kind of glowing tiredness, the night burning down toward its end. But that is still ahead. For now the ball is at its first full height, the room blazing, the crowd whole, the music pouring, the dancers turning, and we may stand unseen at the edge of it and simply watch and let the beauty of it work upon us. The bright turning spectacle of the dance, the most splendid hour of the most splendid evening, the very thing the white residence on the white square was built and made and laboured over to produce. Let us give a thought to the music that filled the entertainment, and to the musicians who made it, for the music was the soul of the ball, and like so much else of the evening's pleasure, it was the work of people who laboured, unregarded, that the company might enjoy. The musicians were hired for the night, a band of players engaged to provide the playing for the dancing, and they sat in their gallery or on their dais at the end of the ballroom and played through the hours the dances of the age, the quadrilles and the country dances and the waltzes, the music that set the pace and the pattern of the dancing, and that carried the bright evening on its tide of sound. It was hard work, the playing, the hours of it, the steady labour of providing it without pause for a company that wished to dance the night through, and the musicians played on, hour after hour, tired as the dark wore on, the players who made the sound that the dancers never thought about, the soul of the party provided by hired hands in the gallery, labouring through the night that the company might dance. And the music itself was a particular thing, the dance music of the age, lively and rhythmic, and made for the moving feet, the quadrille with its measured figures, the country dance with its long sets, and above all, the waltz, the turning, gliding dance that had conquered the ballrooms of Europe, and that was, for the young especially, the very heart of the ball's romance. The music poured down from the gallery over the dancing crowd, filling the grand room, lifting and turning, setting the rhythm of the night, and it was, for all that it was provided by hired and labouring hands, genuinely beautiful. The music and the dancing together, making the bright spectacle that was the glory of the ball, the moving company, and the pouring music joined in the one splendid living thing. And let us give a thought, too, to the flowers, for the flowers were everywhere tonight, banked and massed through all the chambers, and they were a luxury of a particular and a telling kind. For to fill a grand house with fresh flowers in the early spring, before the gardens of England had much to offer, required the hothouses, the glass houses heated through the winter at great expense to force the blooms, the conservatories of the wealthy where the exotic flowers were raised, and the filling of the rooms with masses of fresh hothouse flowers was a display of wealth as pointed as any. The conspicuous consumption of the costly and the out of season, the blooms that only the rich could command, massed and banked through the rooms to crown the evening's splendour. The scent of them hung heavy in the heated air, the colour of them everywhere, the costly out-of-season blooms that spoke in their very profusion of a wealth that could command the seasons themselves, force the spring in the depth of winter, fill a grand place with flowers on a night when the gardens without were barely waking. It was all of a piece, the music and the flowers and the candlelight and the food and the wine and the apparatus of the splendour, all of it, the conspicuous display of a wealth without stint, the spending of money on the beautiful and the costly and the fleeting, the evening that cost a fortune and lasted a night, the flowers that bloomed for an entertainment and wilted by the dawn, the candles that burned down, the food that was eaten, the music that sounded and was gone, the evening a kind of magnificent burning of money for the sake of beauty and pleasure and display, the costly fleeting splendour that was the very signature of the age and the class and the world we have been walking through tonight. And there is a kind of beauty in that very prodigality. The riches spent so freely on the beautiful and the transient, the grand festivity that existed only for its one night and then was gone. The flowers and the music and the light all spent in the one brief blaze, the magnificent fleeting glory of the ball, made to last a night and to be remembered, and then to vanish, like the night itself, into the past. Let us stop now, in the midst of the evening, and simply be in it, not looking at this or that part, but soaking in the whole of it, the deep sensory world of the party. But the ball was a thing felt through all the senses at once, and to truly be there we must let it reach us, as it reached the guests, in all its warmth and light and sound and scent. Begin with the light, the golden, brilliant glow that filled the spaces, the radiance of hundreds of candles and the new gas, thrown back and doubled in the great mirrors, dripping from the chandeliers, gathering in the cut glass and the silver and the jewels, a swimming golden brilliance that filled the rooms and lifted the spirits, so different from any we know. The soft, living golden light of flame, kind to the faces it lit, golden in its colour, the very light of pleasure and splendour, filling the grand rooms with its golden haze. Then the sound, the rich layered sound of the splendid evening, the music pouring down from the gallery over all the rhythm of the dance, and beneath and around it the sound of the company, the rise and fall of 100 voices in talk, the laughter, the rustle of the silk, the whisper of the dancing feet on the polished floor, the clink of glass, the rich human music of a large gathering at its pleasure, the sound of the ball that meant company and warmth and splendour and the bright social life at its height, and the scent, the rich heavy scent of the grand evening, the flowers above all, the masses of hothouse blooms filling the warm air with their perfume, and beneath it the scent of the wax candles, the costly perfumes of the company, the faint scent of the food drifting from the supper room, the scented air of the crowded chambers, heavy and thick and luxurious, the very smell of wealth and pleasure and the affair, and the warmth of the crowded rooms, the heat of the many candles and the many bodies, the rooms grown warm and close with the press of the press and the blaze of the lights, a warmth that was part of the luxury, the enveloping air of the splendid evening, so that the guests moved through a golden-scented haze of light and sound and perfume, wrapped in the full sensory atmosphere of the ball, immersed in it, carried by it, the warmth and the light and the music and the scent all together, making the one great enveloping experience of the splendid ball. And the touch of it, the feel of the silk and the satin, the cool of the jewels, the firm pressure of a partner's hand in the dance, the give of the deep chairs, the tactile luxury of the evening, felt through the skin as the rest was felt through the eye and the ear and the nose, the grand ball reaching the guests through every sense at once. This was the ball not as a set of apartments and functions, but as something lived, a tide that took the guest up and bore them along, so that afterward they would remember not the plan of the evening but the feeling of it. The heat and the colour and the sound run together into a single shining impression that no inventory of its parts could ever recover. And that, more than any fact we might gather about it, is the thing to hold tonight. If you are truly to be there among the turning couples, beneath the burning candles, in the hours when the house was most fully itself, so let it carry you, the way it carried them. There is nothing now that you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Let the music go on below you, and the dancers turn, and let yourself be drawn down, gently, through the gold and the hush and the slow late hours of the dark, toward the rest that waits at the far end of it. Let us leave the blazing ballroom now and go down, far down, to the other place beneath this one, the house below the stairs, where the gathering looks entirely different, for while the company dances in the light above, the turning machine of the household labours in the heat below, and the splendour upstairs rests, every moment of it, upon the unresting work of the world downstairs, and to see the evening whole, we must see this too. Come down the back stairs, away from the lights and the music, down into the basement world of the servants, and the whole character of the house changes about us, the rich, warm, scented air of the company giving way to the hot, hard-working air of the kitchen and the passages, the music thinning to a far faint thread, the brilliance left behind, and in its place the heat and the hurry and the labour of the people who made the revel possible. The kitchen is at the very crisis of its long day, for a dinner of many courses for a large company is an undertaking of enormous labour and precision, and the cook and his helpers have been at full stretch for hours, and are at it still for the supper, for the ball company is yet to come. The great range roars, the fires blaze, the heat is tremendous, and in it the cook moves in a controlled fury, directing, tasting, watching, his face scarlet and running, for upon him above all the success of the evening's eating rests, and a fault in his dishes would be a fault before the most critical throng in the kingdom. Around him, the kitchen maids labour at the endless work, the chopping and the stirring and the watching, the dishing up of course after course to be carried away upstairs, the whole hot, intricate business of producing a grand dinner from a single hot, crowded kitchen, and beyond. In the scullery, the maids are already at the mountains of plates and dishes coming back down from above, the washing up that will go on long after the company is gone, their hands red and raw in the hot water, their work without end. And between the kitchen and the rooms above runs the ceaseless traffic of the service, the footmen and the waiters going up the back stairs with the laden trays and the dishes and coming down with the empties, an endless stream of them on the stairs all evening, carrying up the courses of the dinner and the wines and the supper and the ices, carrying down the used plates and the empty dishes and the dirty glasses. The vast labour of feeding a grand company carried dish by dish and tray by tray, up and down the back stairs by hand, all revel without pause. The butler oversees it all, moving between the dining room and his pantry in the cellar, the silver in his charge, the wine in his keeping, the whole service his responsibility. The housekeeper governs the female side, the maids and the rooms and the linen, and the below-stairs realm, swelled tonight by the hired help brought in for the occasion, labours through the evening at the full stretch of its powers, hot and hurried and unresting, so that the company above may dance and dine, and never give a thought to where the splendour comes from. For that was the genius and the cruelty of the arrangement, that the labour should be invisible, that the splendour above should seem to produce itself, the dishes appearing as if by magic, the chambers warm and lit as if of their own accord, the whole comfortable, brilliant gathering floating free, to the press that enjoyed it, of any visible labour at all, while below their feet, and behind the green baize doors, the small army of servants laboured in the heat to make it so. The dancers in the blazing ballroom heard nothing of the roaring kitchen below them. The diners at the gleaming table saw nothing of the hot crowded scullery where their used plates were even then being scoured. The machinery of the labour was hidden, by design, behind the doors and down the back stairs, so that the company should enjoy the splendour without the inconvenience of seeing how it was made. And there is something I want us to hold in mind, moving between the two halves of the mansion tonight, the blazing rooms above and the labouring depths below, that they were one house and one evening, that the dance and the drudgery were two faces of the single thing, and that the beauty of the gathering, real as it was, rested wholly and at every moment upon the hidden labour of the people in the heat below, the cook at his roaring range, the maid at her scalding tub, the footman endlessly climbing the back stairs, the unseen labour that made the scene's splendour possible. While the company dances in the blazing rooms, let us go out once more into the night, to a part of the evening that the guests gave little thought to, and that went on, all through the hours, in the cold and the dark outside, the waiting of the carriages. For each guest came by carriage, and the carriages did not simply set down their passengers and go, but waited. Many of them the night through drawn up in their ranks in the square and the streets about it, ready to carry their families home whenever the night should end. And the waiting of the carriages was a whole world of its own, a cold and patient vigil kept by men and horses through the hours of the ball. Picture the square through the night, the ranks of waiting carriages drawn up along the sides and in the streets nearby, the private carriages of the wealthy, and on their boxes the coachman, muffled against the cold, waiting, and the footman, and the horses standing patient in the traces or unhitched and blanketed, the whole patient apparatus of the transport of the rich kept waiting in the bitter dark night, while the company danced warm and bright within. The men passed the hours as best they could. The coachman and the footman of the grand houses gathered perhaps in knots to talk and to keep warm, or dozing on their boxes, or slipping away, those who could, to the nearest tavern, or to the servants' quarters of the mansion, where the hired help and the visiting servants might be given some warmth and some refreshment in the kitchen regions, while their masters danced above. For there was a whole below-stairs hospitality on such a night, the visiting servants fed and warmed in the kitchen quarters, the coachmen given their beer, a rough warm fellowship of the servants of the various houses gathered in the depths, while the company mingled above, the two parallel gatherings, the masters and the servants, going on at once in the one townhouse. But many of the men must wait outside with the carriages and the horses through the cold hours, and theirs was a hard vigil, the coachman on his box through the dark, the cold creeping into him, the wait with nothing to do but endure it, until at last, in the small hours or the dawn, his family came out at last, and he might climb down stiff and frozen and put to and drive them home, and then see to the horses, and only then, near the dawn, seek his own bed for the brief time left before his day began again. It was a hard service, the night-long waiting in the chill, and it fell, like so much of the labour of that world, on the men who served, the coachmen and the grooms and the footmen who passed the night of the grand soirée, not in the warmth and the light and the dancing, but in the chill and the dark and the patient waiting outside, that their masters might dance. And the horses too kept their patient vigil, the great carriage horses standing through the night in the frost, blanketed against it, patient as horses are, waiting through the hours of the ball for the moment they would be put to and would draw the carriage home through the dawn. There is something I find worth a thought in the patient waiting horses and the muffled waiting men, out in the cold dark square through the night, the unregarded foundation of the evening's pleasure, for the assembly could not have come, and could not go home, but for them the men and the horses who waited in the cold, while the music played within, and they are part of the truth of the evening too. The patient freezing vigil outside that made the warm bright pleasure inside possible, the coachman frozen on his box, the horse patient in the dark, waiting, all the night, for the grand occasion to end, and the moment to come when they might carry the warm, tired, happy company home through the breaking dawn. Let us consider, while the dancing runs on, the broad rhythm of which this evening is one beat, the London season, for the dinner and the ball tonight do not stand alone, but belong to a whole annual cycle of fashionable life, and to understand why all these people are gathered in this house on this spring night, you must understand the season that brought them, for the wealthy and the titled of this age did not live the year round in London. They had their country seats, their grand houses set in their broad acres far from the town, and there they passed the larger part of the year, the autumn and the winter and the deep summer, hunting and shooting and managing their estates and living the country life that was the true foundation of their world. But each year, as the spring came on, they left their country residences and came up to London for the season, and the town filled, and the houses of districts like this one were opened and aired and brought to life, and the apparatus of fashionable society cranked into motion for a few crowded, brilliant months. The season ran roughly from the spring into the high summer, tied in part to the sitting of Parliament, which brought the political and the great up to town, and tied in part to the simple convention of the fashionable world, which had settled on these months as the time to gather. And through those months the town was the scene of a relentless whirl of social activity, the dinners and the balls and the routs and the receptions following one upon another night after night, the mornings given to calls and to shopping and to the park, the afternoons to more calls, the occasions to the great entertainments, fashionable society caught up in a ceaseless round of seeing and being seen, of entertaining and being entertained, that ran on at this exhausting pace for the whole length of the season. To be in society was to be swept up in it, the endless succession of engagements, the diary-filled weeks ahead, the gowns and the carriages and the late darks, the brilliant tiring machine of the season turning night after night through the spring and the summer. And beneath the pleasure, the season had its serious purpose, for it was, above all, the marriage market of the ruling class, the means by which the small closed world of the wealthy and the titled brought its young people together under careful watch so that suitable matches might be made. The young women came out into society, were presented, attended their first balls, were launched upon the season in the hope of finding, before too many seasons passed, a suitable husband. The young men sought among the season's beauties and heiresses, and the mothers watched and schemed and steered, and the whole glittering social round was, beneath its pleasure, the machinery by which the old families renewed and allied themselves generation by generation, the bloodlines joined, the fortunes matched, the alliances made. And it was here, in this great machinery, that the new money found its way in, for the season was where the old world and the new most freely mixed, where the new fortune might find an old name to marry, where the daughter of the grand townhouse might be wed to the son of the new fortune. The slow joining of the two orders carried forward through the dinners and the balls and the careful introductions of the season. So tonight's evening is one turn of that wheel, and like all the rest it will end in dispersal. By the breakfast hour the company will have scattered to the day's engagements, the morning calls and the shops and the carriage airing in the park, and by nightfall to somewhere new, another table, another staircase, another house lit and waiting, the round carrying them on without pause until the summer comes. And when at last it does, and Parliament rises and the heat settles on the streets, the doors of these houses will be shut, and the furniture shrouded, and the families gone down to their acres again for the quiet country months, and until the next spring draws them back, and the entire performance begins once more. The White House on the Square lives only for these few crowded weeks. It is opened for them, and closed after them, and tonight, at the very height of its purpose, it is doing the one thing it was raised and aired and made ready to do. We have seen the district by night, blazing for its splendid party, but let us think for a moment of the district by day, of the daily life of the new white quarter beyond the splendid evenings, for Belgravia was not only a stage for balls, but a place where people lived, and its daily life had a particular character worth our knowing. By day the grand squares and the wide streets had a calm, ordered, prosperous quiet about them, the cream-coloured terraces gleaming in the daylight, the railed gardens green at the centres of the squares, the quarter breathing the settled, confident peace of vast wealth at its ease. The traffic of the district was the traffic of the rich, the private carriages rolling out on their errands, the riders on their fine horses going to and from the park, the tradesmen's carts making their deliveries at the area doors, the daily commerce of supplying and serving the large houses going quietly forward. Now, and the streets of the district had their own daily population, the servants above all, for the places required armies of servants, and the streets of Belgravia by day were full of them on their errands, the footmen and the maids and the cook's boys going to and from the shops, the tradesmen and their men delivering to the area doors, the below-stairs life of the quarter carried on in the streets and the areas and the mews behind the grand fronts, a parallel world to the grand sphere above, the servants' Belgravia of the basements and the back streets and the mews, as populous and as busy in its way as the gilded Belgravia of the drawing-rooms. The mews behind the stately houses, the lanes where the stables and the coach-houses stood, had their own world, the coachmen and the grooms and the stable-boys among the horses and the carriages, a humbler horse-smelling world tucked behind the gleaming fronts, the working transport yards of the rich. And the district had its rhythms, its daily and its seasonal rhythms, the morning calm and the afternoon stir of carriages as the fashionable went out on their calls, the great emptiness of the deep summer when the season ended and the families went away to their country seats, and the houses were shut up and shrouded, and the district fell quiet and half deserted, the caretakers and the skeleton staff left to keep the empty places, the squares silent, the quarter waiting through the months for the spring that would bring its families back and wake it once more to its brilliant life. For Belgravia lived, in a sense, only half the year, blazing through the season and sleeping through the rest, the houses full and lit for the spring and summer months, and then emptied and dark for the autumn and winter, the quarter breathing in and out with the broad rhythm of the season, full and then empty, brilliant and then silent, year after year. There is something worth feeling in the daily life of the district, the ordinary settled prosperous existence that underlay the grand affairs, for the balls and the dinners were the bright peaks of a life that was, for the most part, calmer and more ordinary, the daily round of the wealthy in their comfortable modern houses, the calls and the shopping and the park and the calm domestic hours, the children in the nurseries, the households going about their work, the settled daily existence of the rich in the new white quarter, beneath and around the evenings that crowned it. The ball was the exception, the peak, the grand occasion. The daily round was the ground from which it rose, the ordinary, prosperous, comfortable existence of the wealthy in their new modern residences on their new white squares, going quietly about the business of being rich in the richest quarter of the richest city in the world. And to that ordinary daily round the house would return, when the soiree was over and cleared away, the calm, prosperous domestic round taking up again, the family living its ordinary days in the grand mansion between the occasions until the next ball, the next dinner, the next bright peak should rise from the calm daily ground of the life of the new white quarter. As the ball runs on into the night, there comes a pause in the dancing for the supper, the late feast that refreshed the company in the small hours and was itself one of the splendours of a society ball. At a signal the dancing breaks off, and the party moves by degrees to the supper room, where a great table has been laid, not for a seated dinner now, but for a standing or a loosely seated supper, a cold and glittering feast set out for the company to come at and partake of as they would. And the supper table was a thing of beauty and abundance, laid with the cold delicacies of the age, the dressed fowls and the hams and the tongues and the raised pies, the lobster and the salmon, the jellies and the creams and the trifles, the towering confections of the confectioner's art, the ices that were the great luxury of such occasions, the whole spread crowned with flowers and lit by the candelabra and the chandeliers, a midnight banquet of cold splendour to refresh the dancers and carry them on toward the dawn. And the champagne flowed at the supper, the champagne above all, the wine of celebration and of the small hours, poured and poured again, the corks drawn, the glasses filled, the iced sparkling wine going round the tired and happy company, lifting the spirits for the dancing yet to come. There was a particular pleasure to the ball supper, coming as it did in the deep of the night, in the midst of the long pleasure of the dancing, a moment of rest and refreshment and renewed conviviality, the company gathering about the glittering table, the dark rising again, the laughter, the renewed warmth of the gathering, the bright society pausing in its dancing to eat and drink and gather its strength and its spirits for the hours of dancing still to come. It was, in its way, the most relaxed and genial passage of the evening, the careful formality of the dinner long past, the company warmed by the wine and the dancing and the lateness of the hour into an easy, happy conviviality, the supper room loud with talk and laughter, the champagne flowing, the cold feast spread under the blazing light. And here, at the supper, the social barriers of the dinner relaxed a little, for the supper was less rigidly ordered than the dinner, the crush moving freely, gathering as they would, the careful precedence of the table set aside, and in the easy mingling of the supper room, the old order and the new might meet more freely than the stiff ceremony of the dinner had allowed, the conversations forming across the lines of rank, the new money and the old name finding, in the genial late genial hour, an easier acquaintance than the daylight world permitted. The supper was a leveller, a little, the lateness and the wine and the relaxation of the hour softening the rigid distinctions, and many a useful acquaintance, many a first step toward a match or an alliance, was made in the easy mingling of the supper room in the small hours, the barriers down a little, the company warm and easy, the social chemistry of the soiree working its freest in the genial late hour. And then the supper eaten, the champagne drunk, the company refreshed, the music strikes up again from the ballroom, and the dancers, renewed, drift back to the floor, and the dancing resumes to carry on now into the last and latest hours of the night, the deep small hours when only the young and the tireless and the truly devoted to pleasure remained, dancing on toward the dawn. The older guests begin, after the supper, to think of their carriages and their beds, the first of them slipping away into the night, but the heart of the company dances on, the ballroom blazing still, the music playing still, burning down slowly toward its end. And we may leave them to it for a while, the dancers in the late blazing salon, and turn aside to quieter corners of the house. For in the midst of all this splendour, there were quieter moments too, and quieter people. And it is to one of these quiet corners, away from the music and the light, that I want to take you next. Let us go for a while, beyond the lit windows of the house, out into the night of the city. For the grand evening did not blaze alone in an empty world, but in the midst of a vast and various and sleeping city. And the splendour within is the truer, and the more clearly seen for a glance at the dark without. Step out then, in imagination, through the blazing rooms and down the grand staircase and out at the door, past the carriages waiting in their long ranks, the coachman and the footman drowsing on their boxes through the hours of the ball, the horses standing patient in the cool night air, and out onto the pavement of the square, into the night. The square is quiet, but for the waiting carriages and the music drifting from the lit house, the other houses dark or dimly lit, their families perhaps out at their own engagements or gone to their beds, the gas lamps burning steady along the empty pavements, the railed garden, dark at the centre. And there across the road, in the shadows, a few figures still linger, the idlers and the poor who gathered to watch the carriages arrive and have stayed on into the night, watching the lit mansion, the glimpses of the dancing, the beautiful life they could see through the windows and would never enter. For the city beyond the bright square was not all Belgravia, and within a short walk of these gleaming palaces lay another world entirely, the world of the poor, the crowded streets and the mean houses, and the unlit courts where the broad mass of the city's people lived their hard lives, the laundresses and the labourers and the costermongers and the crossing sweepers, the vast population of the poor on whose labour, in 1,000 indirect ways, the wealth of the rich in part depended, and who lived, many of them, in a poverty as deep as the wealth of Belgravia was high. The contrast was real, and it was close, the palaces and the slums within a mile of one another, the dinner of many courses and the family with no dinner at all, the ball gown that cost more than a labourer earned in a year, and the labourer's wife in her one worn dress, the two worlds pressed close together in the one city, divided by a gulf that the bright lit windows of the ball made, for a moment starkly visible to the few poor watchers in the shadows of the square. I do not raise this to spoil the splendour, for the splendour was real, and the people who made it and enjoyed it were not wicked, but only born where they were born, as the poor were born where they were born, and the vast machinery of wealth and rank that set the one in the ballroom and the other in the shadows was older and larger than any of them. But the contrast was there, and it was part of the truth of the age, and the gathering is the truer for our seeing it whole, the blaze of the riches within, and the dark of the poverty without, the dancing and the watching, the little window and the shadowed street, the two orders of the one city on the one spring night. And there is something to feel in the figures in the shadows, the poor who came to watch the rich at their play, drawn by the beauty and the strangeness of it, the lit windows and the music and the glimpses of the dancing, a free show of a world they could never enter, watched from the dark across the road, and then the cold and the lateness driving them off at last, the long walk home to the mean streets and the crowded rooms, carrying away the memory of the beautiful life they had glimpsed, the lit house, the music, the dancing, the splendid evening that was not, and never would be, for them. And then let us come back, gratefully, in out of the dark and the cold and the hard contrast of the night, back across the quiet square and up the lit steps, and into the blaze and the warmth and the music, and let the unlit city recede behind us for tonight. For the contrast is real and worth the seeing, but the ball is real too, and the beauty of it, and there is no virtue in refusing to see the splendour any more than in refusing to see the gloom, And the truest seeing holds them both, the blaze and the shadow, the dance and the watching, the wealth and the want, the whole unequal, brilliant, troubled world of the age, gathered and shown in the one lit mansion and the one dark square on the one spring night. We are guests of the splendour tonight, and we may enjoy it, the warmth and the light and the music and the dance, but we are the wiser and the more human for having stepped out once into the blackness and seen the watchers in the shadows, and remembered the other world that lay always just beyond the lit windows of the ball. High up in the house, far above the blazing ballroom, on the nursery floor under the roof, there is a still corner of the grand evening that the company below will never see, and it is one of the most human and the most touching moments of the night, and I want to take you to it now, away from the music and the splendour, for the contrast is part of the truth of the occasion. For the children of the mansion, the young children too small to take any part in the ball, have not been able to sleep. Of course they have not, with the house full of music and light, and the excitement of the great small hours running through it, and they have crept from their beds in their night-clothes and gathered at the head of the stairs, or at the gallery rail, where they can look down, unseen, on the brilliant world below. Picture them there, the children in their nightgowns kneeling at the gallery rail, or peering through the banisters, looking down on the ball, on the staircase alive with the ascending and descending assembly, on the glimpses through the open doors of the blazing salons, on the ladies in their wide bright gowns, and the gentlemen in their black and white, on the jewels catching the light, on the brilliant turning spectacle of the grown-up life at its most splendid. To a child, such a sight was pure magic, a glimpse of a realm of beauty and grandeur and mystery, the world they would one day enter, but that was now, tonight, gloriously beyond them, a fairy tale come to life in their own house, the music drifting up, the light, the beautiful people, the shining spectacle of the ball seen from above in the dark, in their night clothes, when they should have been asleep. And there is something I find very tender in it, the children at the rail, watching the grown-up life at its play, half understanding, wholly enchanted, drinking in the beauty and the strangeness of it, storing up a memory that some of them would carry all their lives, the night of the grand ball, seen from the gallery in their nightgowns in the dark. And perhaps, if they are fortunate, there is a moment in it sweeter still, for sometimes, in the midst of the evening, a mother would slip away from the company below, climb the stairs to the nursery floor, and come to her children at the rail, in all her ball-gown splendour, to kiss them good night, to send them back to bed, to be for a moment, in the midst of her great performance, simply their mother. And to the child, to see the mother come transformed, in her gown and her jewels, beautiful and shining as they had never seen her, smelling of scent, come up out of the brilliant world below to kiss them in the dark, was a moment of pure wonder and love, the grandeur and the tenderness joined, the shining mother bending to kiss the child at the rail, and then gone again, back down to the light and the music, leaving the child to carry the memory of it back to bed, the beautiful mother in the gown, the kiss in the dark, the night of the ball. It was for the children, the human heart of the night's evening, the point when the grandeur and the love touched, and it happened in many such residences on many such nights, the mother slipping up from the ball to her children, the brief, tender meeting in the shadow above the splendour. And then the children are sent back to their beds, gently, by the nurse or by the mother herself, back to the nursery, to lie awake a while longer, listening to the music drifting up from below, the faint far strains of the dancing, before sleep took them at last, the ball going on beneath them in the night, the beautiful life they had glimpsed turning on without them while they slept. There is a quietness here, in the nursery floor in the night, the children settled back to their beds, the nurse keeping her watch, the music coming faint from far below, a pocket of stillness and tenderness folded into the heart of the loud, splendid festivity. and it is worth our pausing in it, this quiet human corner of the night, before we go back down to the splendour, for it reminds us that beneath all the grandeur and the spectacle and the social game, this was also, simply, a family's house, with children asleep at the top of it, and a mother who, however great the evening, was still a mother, and slipped away in the midst of her triumph to kiss her children in the dark. Let them sleep then, the children under the roof, with the music in their dreams, and let us go quietly back down toward the light. Let us think, while the entertainment runs its course, about the woman at the centre of it all, the hostess, for she is the true author of the evening, and the giving of a splendid entertainment was a woman's art and a woman's labour and a woman's anxiety, and to understand the late hours we must understand her. For a splendid evening did not give itself, and behind the seeming effortless splendour lay weeks of a hostess's careful planning and days of her anxious labour, and on the night itself the whole weight of the evening's success rested, in the end, upon her. It was she who had conceived the festivity, chosen its date, balanced it against the other engagements of the crowded season, so that it should not clash with some greater entertainment and find itself thin of company. Hers too was the list, that delicate labour, deciding whom to ask and whom to leave out, balancing the company, mixing the old and the new, the brilliant and the useful, the names that would draw others and the rising people worth cultivating, the whole careful chemistry of the guest list on which the success of the evening so largely depended. It was she who had planned the dinner with the cook, the courses and the dishes, the whole meal that must be worthy of the crowd. She had overseen the arrangement of the rooms, the flowers, the music, the thousand details of the setting. It was she who had agonized over the seating, the precedence, the pairing of the guests for the procession into dinner, the intricate diagram of rank that a single error could spoil, and it was she who, on the night itself, stood at the head of her stairs to receive each guest, who presided over her table, who watched the company through the soiree with a practised, anxious eye, smoothing the difficulties, drawing out the shy, separating the quarrelsome, making the introductions, gathering the threads, holding the delicate social fabric of the evening together by her own art and attention, the labour invisible beneath the smiling ease, the anxiety hidden beneath the gracious calm. For the hostess's art was above all an art of seeming, the art of making the immensely difficult appear effortless, of presiding over the vast, complex, anxious machinery of the ball with an air of serene, untroubled ease, as though the splendour gave itself, as though she had done nothing but be charming, when in truth she had laboured for weeks and was, beneath the calm, in an agony of anxiety lest anything go wrong. And much could go wrong, and the hostess knew it and watched against it all evening, the dinner that might falter, the guest who might take offence, the company that might not mix, the thousand small disasters that lay in wait for a grand party and that only the hostess's vigilance held at bay. The successful hostess made it look easy, and that was her highest art, the serene presiding ease beneath which lay the weeks of labour and the night-long anxiety, the swan's calm gliding above the furious hidden paddling. The splendid evening carried on her art and her labour and her nerve, while she smiled and was charming, and seemed to do nothing at all. And the stakes for her were high, for a grand revel was a woman's chief arena, the place where her particular power and skill could show, and her standing in the fashionable world rested in large part on her success as a hostess, on her ability to gather the right company, and give the right evenings, and make her house a place that the great wished to come to. A triumphant entertainment raised her, made her a power, a hostess whose invitations were prized. A failure diminished her, was whispered of, remembered, and so she laboured and agonized and presided the author and the artist and the anxious mistress of the evening, and tonight, as the grand festivity runs toward its triumphant close, the company brilliant, the dinner praised, the dancing gay, her art has held, her labour has borne its fruit, and she may feel, beneath her tiredness, the deep quiet satisfaction of the artist, whose work has succeeded, the evening she conceived and laboured over and worried through, come off, at last, as a triumph, a night that would be remembered, the white townhouse on the square confirmed by this one brilliant affair in its place among the large houses of the town. It was her achievement, the evening, more than anyone's, and the satisfaction of it when it came off was hers, more than anyone's, the deep quiet pride of the hostess whose grand affair had been, as she had prayed it would be, a triumph. Before the night ends, let us turn our notice to the smallest and the lowest figure in all this great household, the youngest of the maids, the under-housemaid or the scullery maid, the girl who labours unseen in the depths of the townhouse through the splendid evening, for she is the easiest of all to overlook, and her night stands at the very opposite pole from the dancing above, and there is a justice in giving her, across the long years, the attention that no one in her own time thought to give. She is a girl, very likely, of 14 or 15, come up from the country to take the lowest place in the household, one of many children in a poor family, sent into service as soon as she was old enough to be useful, for service was the great destiny of the poor girl of this age, and a place in a grand London house was reckoned a good situation, a thing her family was glad of. Her day on this day of the splendid entertainment began, as her days always began, in the cold dark before 5 o'clock, when she rose from her bed in the attic and came down by candlelight to begin the first labour of the household's day, the raking and lighting of the kitchen fire, the drawing of the water, the first of the endless tasks that filled her every waking hour. And on this day, the day of the dinner and the ball, her labour was greater than ever, for the household laboured doubly toward the grand evening, and the lowest maid laboured hardest of all, at the rough and the heavy, and the dirty work that no one above her would touch, the carrying and the scrubbing and the fetching, the endless washing up that the great dinner generated, the mountains of plates and dishes coming down from above to be scoured in the scalding water of the scullery, her hands red and raw, her back aching, her feet sore, hour upon hour, through the affair and far into the night, long after the dancing had stopped above, the washing up going on, the lowest maid at her tub in the small hours while the assembly drove away into the dawn. And she would have seen almost nothing of the splendour she laboured to create. That is the hard truth of it, for her place was below, in the heat and the wet, and the blazing rooms and the dancing and the beautiful company were as far from her as the moon, glimpsed perhaps in a snatched moment on the back stairs, a flash of a bright gown through a doorway, a strain of the music drifting down, but never truly seen, never shared, the splendour she made invisible to her who made it. She laboured in the dark below that the company might shine in the light above, and the gulf between her and the dancing ladies, the gulf of birth and fortune that put the one in the ballroom and the other at the scullery tub, was as wide and as fixed as any gulf in that world of gulfs, the accident of birth that was, in that age, very nearly the whole of a destiny. And yet she was a girl, with a girl's heart and a girl's life going on beneath the labour, and it would be a poverty in us to see her only as the lowest hand of the household. She had her friends among the other maids, the whispered talk in the attic before sleep, the shared bed, the rough warm fellowship of those who laboured together. She had her hopes of rising, of becoming in time a housemaid, and then perhaps an upper servant, of bettering her place by the slow patient climb that was the only road open to her. She had her rare half-day off, her glimpse of the great strange city, her letters from home. She had, perhaps, her dreams, lying awake in the attic, in the small hours of the bright life she glimpsed and could never enter. The gowns and the dancing and the beautiful life above, a world as close as the floors below her feet and as far as a fairy tale. She was a whole person, this overlooked girl, as whole as any shining lady at the ball, with as much within her, and the only difference between them was the accident of where they had been born. So as the evening blazes and the company dances, let us spare a thought, and more than a thought, for the girl at her tub in the scullery in the small hours, the lowest and the hardest worked and the least regarded of all the makers of the splendour, and grant her, across the gulf of the years, the simple recognition that she was real, that her life was a real one, as worthy of tenderness as any lived in the blazing spaces above. The dishes are nearly done now. The night is nearly over. Soon she may climb at last to her bed in the attic, for the few hours of sleep before another day begins. Sleep then, small one, when at last you may. You have earned it more than any dancer in the rooms above. The night wears on, deep into the night now, and the ball begins by degrees to wind toward its end. Those who remain are the last and the most willing, the young and the tireless, and the few older heads too fond of the floor to leave it. And the room they dance in has a beauty quite unlike the one it wore at its height. The crowd is gone that filled it earlier. There is space now between the couples and air, and the candles that blazed in their hundreds have burned low and begun to gutter, so that the light has dropped to a mellow gold, and the gilding has gone soft and dim. It is gentler and stiller and more intimate, an apartment small enough at last that the dancers know one another's faces, and the music, still playing, seems to play for them alone, for the handful left awake in the tall house, while the city sleeps around it. Aha! There is a glow to the late ball, a kind of tired enchantment, the night burning down, the music playing on but softer now, the dancers fewer and moving more slowly, the room sunk into the warm golden dimness of the small hours, the grand revel past its blazing noon, and sinking now toward its rest, but sinking beautifully, the beauty of the late hours different from but no less real than the beauty of the height. The young who remain dance on in the low light, the partnerships settled now, the ones who wish to dance together dancing together, the romance of the evening come late in the night, to its quiet flowering, a young man and a young woman who have danced half the night together, moving now in the dim warm room with the particular tenderness of the small hours, the music soft, the candles low, the night drawing them close. It was in such an hour, the late soft watches of the ball, that much of the real work of the heart was done, the attachments formed, the understandings reached, the matches that the daylight world would later solemnize first quietly made. In the dim ballroom in its last reaches, with the music playing on and the night burning down, and the musicians play on, tired now, the nights playing told in their weariness, but playing still, the music softer and slower in the late watches, the dance is gentler, the wild energy of the height of the gathering given way to the soft sweet tiredness of the close. The servants too are weary, the footmen who have stood and served the evening drooping now at their posts, the household worn down by the day and the longer night, longing all of them for the end, for the last guest to go, for the chance at length to stop. But the end is coming now, the signs of it everywhere, the thinning crowd, the guttering candles, the softening music, the gathering sinking gently toward its close, the brilliant night burning down at last toward the dawn that even now, far off, begins to think of greying the eastern sky beyond the curtained windows. There is a sweetness in the fading of an evening, a particular bittersweet beauty that those who have danced through such a night will know, the tiredness and the happiness mingled, the long pleasure drawing to its end, the reluctance to let the bright hours go, the knowledge that the magic of the hours cannot hold, and is even now slipping away toward the ordinary morning. The young especially feel it, the ones for whom the night has been the summit of life, the dancing and the music and the one they danced with, all of it ending now, the beautiful night passing, never quite to come again, for no two revels are ever the same, and the magic of this one was its own and would not return. And so they dance the last dances tenderly, the faithful few in the dim, warm chamber, drawing out the last of the night, until at last the music stops and does not start again, and the grand evening is at last over, and the time has come for the last of the company to go. And now the company goes. The music has stopped, the dancing is done, and the last of the guests gather themselves to leave, the cloaks and the wraps brought, the carriages called up from where they have waited the night through, and the evening empties itself out at last into the greying dawn. At the door the host and hostess stand once more, as they stood at the beginning to receive, now to speed their parting guests, the words of thanks and farewell, the hopes of meeting again soon, the whole gracious ceremony of the leave-taking, repeated for guest after guest, as they go out into the dawn to their waiting carriages. And down the lit steps and across the carpet the company goes, the tired, happy guests, the gowns a little crushed now, the dressed hair a little fallen, the bright splendour of the early festivity worn soft by the night, handed into their carriages, and the carriages roll away one after another into the pale dawn, out of the square and away through the waking streets to the places where their own beds wait, until the last of them is gone, and the square is empty, and the procession of arrival has reversed itself at last into the procession of departure, the company that gathered at dusk, scattered now at dawn. There is a particular feeling to the departure from a splendid evening in the dawn, that those who have known it will remember, the strange, tired exhilaration of coming out of the warm, lit, blazing rooms into the cold, pale light of the early morning, the night's enchantment still upon you, the music still in your head, the dawn breaking grey and ordinary over the waking city, the two worlds meeting for a moment, the night of splendour and the plain new day, as you cross the carpet and climb into your carriage and roll away home through the empty greying streets. The birds are beginning, perhaps, in the railed garden of the square. The first carts of the day are abroad in the streets, the early workers beginning their day as the revellers end their hours, the two orders passing one another in the dawn, the tired guests in their crushed finery rolling home to bed as the labourers walk out to their work. And the splendid entertainment that blazed so bright a few hours since is over now, gone, a memory already beginning to soften and to settle the night that will be talked of, remembered, the dinner and the ball at the White House on the square, one more bright evening added to the count of the season, done now and gone. And the residence, emptied of its gathering, stands at last still in the dawn, the rooms that blazed so bright now dim and disordered, the candles guttered out or burning low, the flowers wilting, the floors marked with the night's dancing, the splendid stage that was set with such labour now struck and scattered, the grand festivity past. The hostess, when the last guest has gone, stands a moment in the emptied apartments in the grey dawn light, the evening over at last, the triumph or the failure of it now known and past, the strange flat tiredness that comes after a great effort, the rooms so lately full of light and music and company, now empty and dim and still, the held breath of the entertainment long since released, the performance done, and there is a particular stillness in it, the house emptied after the evening, the dawn coming grey at the windows, the splendour spent, a quiet as deep in its way as the quiet of the held breath before the festivity began, the stillness at the other end of the night, the wheel of the evening come full circle, from the quiet ready house at dusk, through the blaze and the music and the dance, back to the emptied townhouse at dawn. But the labour is not quite done even now, for before the lowest of them may seek a bed, the house must be made at least safe, for what little remains of the night, the doors barred, the shutters drawn, the worst of the disorder pushed aside, the real work of restoring it all left for the few hours of daylight that are, in truth, already on the way. And then, one by one, the family climbs at last toward its rooms. The host and the hostess and whoever of the household is still awake, making their slow, tired way up the very staircase the company so lately ascended in procession, past the burnt-down lights, up to their own doors, to undress and lie down and let the night go. The guests are gone, the carriages are away. The dawn stands grey at the edges of the curtains, and there remains only the last settling of a townhouse at the end of its one occasion, which we will follow in a moment to its very close. Let us linger a moment past the end of the ball, into the morning after, for the evening had its aftermath as well as its height, and the house, the morning after a ball, was a particular and a rather poignant thing, and worth our seeing before we let the night close. The family slept late, of course, after the night, the household quiet through the morning, the shutters closed, the apartments dim, the house resting from its great effort. But the servants could not rest long, for the place had to be set to rights, and the morning after a grand soiree was a morning of hard labour below stairs, the cleaning and the clearing and the restoring of the house to its ordinary order after the splendid disorder of the night. And as the light strengthens, the servants come, the housemaids and the underservants who have snatched what little sleep they could, and they move through the wreck of the small hours in the grey calm, gathering the glasses and the abandoned plates, lifting the guttered candle ends from the sconces, carrying out the wilted flowers by the armful, opening the tall windows to let the stale close air of the party out into the cold of the morning, and the smell of smoke and scent and crushed petals with it. They work without speaking, for the family sleeps above them, and there is something almost reverent in the slow methodical undoing of it all, the patient erasure of all trace of the night, so that by the time the household stirs, the room shall stand hushed and ordered again, swept and aired and innocent, as though no such evening had ever passed through them at all. This is the labour that no guest ever saw, and that the morning always required, the price in plain tired work of the beauty of the night before. And it was hard work, the morning after, the washing of the mountains of glass and china, the cleaning of the rooms, the restoring of the furniture to its places, the sweeping and the dusting and the polishing, the labour of clearing away a ball, falling, as the labour always fell, on the servants, who had laboured through the soiree, and now laboured through the morning after, the work of the grand evening not truly done, until the house was clean again, and every trace of the night swept away. By the afternoon, perhaps, the work would be done, the chambers restored, the residence returned to its ordinary order, the ball cleared away entirely, as though it had never been, the only trace of it the memory, and the talk, and the satisfaction, and the bills that would come in over the following days for the wine and the flowers and the hired help and the 1,000 costs of the night. And the family, waking late, would rise to a house restored, the evening behind them now, a triumph remembered, and would turn in time to the next engagement, the next day of the season, the calls and the shopping and that very party perhaps, another dinner, another ball, at another residence the machine of the season turning on, the evening that had consumed so much labour and anxiety and cost already receding into the past, one more bright night in the count of the season done and cleared away and remembered. There is something in it that I find quietly affecting, the splendid revel that cost so much and blazed so bright and lasted a single night, and was, by the next afternoon, swept entirely away, the magnificent fleeting splendour of it gone, leaving only the memory and the talk and the wilted flowers in the dustbin. The costly transient beauty of the ball vanished as completely as the night itself into the past. The house returned to its ordinary self, the splendour spent, the evening over, gone, as all such festivities went, into the memory of the season and the longest silence of the years. There is one last quiet moment I want to bring you to, before we let the late hours close over us entirely, and it is the moment I promised you at the very beginning, the small human moment in the midst of all the splendour, and it comes now, at the very end, when the company is gone and the house is still, and the host and hostess are alone at last. For after the evening, the performance, the hours of greeting and presiding, and watching and smoothing, the hostess and her husband find themselves, for the first time since the dusk, simply alone together in the stillness of the emptied townhouse. And there is a sweetness in that pause, a coming back to one another after the public night, that is worth our pausing on. Picture them then in a still room, the host and the hostess, the grand revel over, sitting a while together before they climb to bed, too tired almost to speak, the strange flat calm of the after evening upon them. And perhaps they talk a little, softly, of the evening, of how it went, of the small triumphs and the small mishaps, of who came and who did not, of the things that pleased and the things that did not, the shared reckoning of the night, that only the two of them, the makers of the affair, could share. Or perhaps they do not talk at all, but only sit together in the hush, too tired for words, content simply to be together, the public performance over, the masks set aside, the two of them alone, at last in the stillness of their own house in the dawn. For beneath all the splendour and the social game and the public evening, they were also, simply, two people, a husband and a wife, who had given a grand party together and were tired together at the end of it. And there is a tenderness in that, the private heart beneath the public splendour, the two of them alone in the calm after the brilliant crowd. And it is the human truth at the centre of the whole glittering performance, that real people behind the evening, tired and together and quiet at the end of the night. And then they too climb the stairs to bed, the staircase still now and dim, the candles low, the mansion settling around them into its rest, and within their chamber the last small rituals of the night, the undressing, the maid and the valet waited up to attend them, the jewels put away, the finery laid aside, the tired bodies easing at last into the rest they have earned. And the house settles, floor by floor, into its rest, the servants seeking their beds at last in the attics, the fires banked, the candles out, the grand rooms below standing dim and disordered and silent, the house that blazed so bright, sinking now into the deep peace of the dawn, the family and the servants alike carried down at last towards sleep, the night over, the splendid ball done, the white townhouse on the square, gone quiet and dark at last as the day breaks grey over the city. It is a long time ago now, this evening we have shared, near 200 years, and everything in it is gone, the host and the hostess and their guests and their children, the butler and the housekeeper and the cook, the footman and the maids, the girl at the scullery tub, and the children at the gallery rail, all of them gone down into the quiet a very long time ago, and the high age of which their soiree was a part vanished with them, the season and the carriages and the candlelit ball, a vanished world. And yet for these few hours we have been let walk among them unseen, through the blazing rooms and the labouring depths, through the dinner and the dance and the quiet corners, and we have seen how it was, how it felt, to give and to attend a grand evening in the new white quarter of Belgravia, in the early bright years of the young Queen's reign, when the old rank and the new money met and mingled under the blazing chandeliers, and the confident wealthy age stood at its glittering height. That, I think, is the gift these old vanished nights can give us, the chance to feel our way back into a world utterly lost, and find it beneath all its strangeness and its splendour, as human as our own, full of pride and anxiety and tenderness and tiredness, of children at a rail and a husband and wife alone at the end of the night, as human and as ready for sleep as we are, tonight, wherever we are lying as we listen. If these quiet journeys back into other times are something you would like to find your way to again, you would be most welcome to come along on the next of them, and it will find you gently when it comes. But that is a thought for the morning, and the morning is a long way off, and there is no hurry now to anything at all. The company is gone, the candles are out, the great house is quiet and dark, and settling, like you, towards sleep. Let the splendour of the evening fade gently in your mind. Let the music grow soft and far. Let the dark be kind, and close and easy. Sleep well, stay warm, be kind to the people in your house, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.